Welcome back, everyone. This is your host, the DN WhatIf, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Had a Criminal's Quirk? A special shout out to the original creator, Angry Karen 666. This is the permission statement by the author in written. Please make sure to show your support by checking out their work from the description. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Parenthood, overhaul mused as he took in the aftermath of Aries' newest episode, was a pain. It was incredibly difficult to be a parent he'd discovered, especially as a single parent juggling a job as important and time-consuming as his own. He'd thought that the underling he'd left to mind his young charge was capable enough, but clearly he was mistaken if the overturned furniture, pile of empty clothing, and hysterical child were any indication. Aries' quirk was vital to his plans of curing the world of the quirk plague and restoring the Yakuza's former glory. Her ability to revert anything she touches, so similar to his own quirk, was part of what drove him to adopt her in the first place, the other being her blood relation to the man who took him in as a child. But at times like this, when he had arms full of weeping 5-year-old and a growing migraine from his overall stressful week, he regretted doing so. Chronostasis? Yes, boss? The brunette handed his apprehensive assistant the still bawling girl. Get her dressed in something comfier and less messy and meet me in the lobby. I'm taking her outside to relax while this is cleaned up. Understood, the silver-haired man replied with a nod, walking with purpose as he patted Aries' back in an attempt to console her. Left alone, the Yakuza boss sighed and rubbed his temples. When his headache reduced from a fierce throbbing to a minor ache, he left to change himself. His bark of, "Someone come clean this mess," an afterthought. With any luck he'll manage to work out a solution to this problem while his daughter runs around in the park. This, Izumi thought cheerfully as she strode away from that morning's hero fight, the kind stranger's words of encouragement fresh in her mind, is going to be a great day. It was rare that anyone supported her hobby of hero watching or dream of being a hero. Even if they didn't ask about her quirk, something she didn't possess at all, most still thought her habits were weird and outlandish. Most simply told her to be realistic and give up. Even her mom, though the woman still let her daughter try since it made her happy. But someone believed in Izumi even though he had no clue what she could do at all. Surely this was a sign of good things to come. The fuck are you smiling about, Deku? Or maybe not. And nothing, the green-eyed girl stuttered as her childhood friend turned bully and his lackeys approached. The boy with the extendable fingers Quirk smirked. Maybe she actually convinced some loser to date her? Before Izumi could correct him herself, Kaken scoffed. As if she could find someone desperate enough to date an ugly, quirkless piece of trash like her. She's so worthless that other quirkless nobodies wouldn't settle for her. The blonde set off an explosion right in front of her face, making her flinch and forcing the tears she was holding back to roll down her freckled cheeks. Later, crybaby, he taunted as he sauntered off. The trio's cruel laughter and words echoed in the brunette's mind on loop as she struggled to stop crying. As painful as the boy's treatment was, it paled in comparison to the salt in the wound caused by the whispers and stares from the students and teachers around that watched, like they did every other time she was bullied, and did nothing. Good mood ruined, Izumi resumed her trek to class enveloped in a dense cloud of depression and shame. At least it couldn't get any worse. She was wrong. Could get much, much worse. Izumi had frozen when the teacher had mentioned her application to UA. She should have figured he would throw her to the wolves. He never did anything to help her before. Just like he did nothing when the class burst into laughter at the news and proceeded to bully her in class. And just like he did nothing when Kaken's response to the news was violence and death threats. No one cared what happened to Midoriya Izumi. It didn't matter that she had the best marks in the whole school, that she was the best behaved student in class, or that she was the most punctual. It didn't matter that Kaken broke rules, was the rudest and least respectful student to ever attend Orudera Middle School, or that he constantly got into fights and street brawls. Bakugo Katsuki had a strong and flashy quirk, perfect for heroics, so he mattered. Izumi didn't have a quirk at all, so she didn't. That was just how things worked in this quirk-driven society. No one cared when their golden child cornered the quirkless girl after school and destroyed her notebook. No one cared when he and his friends beat her up and left with a suggestion that she kill herself. And no one cared when she limped off to find a place to cry, battered and bruised and covered in burns for the 1,000th time since her once and only friend chose to make her his go-to punching bag. To them Izumi was just a worthless Deku. A nobody. A nothing. She didn't matter at all. Kai held his breath as he led Eri into their third park of the day since their arrival in Mizudafu. This one was quiet and, thankfully, empty. Finally, the man relaxed and motioned for his daughter to go play. There was no one here to potentially be rewound or bother him while he made sure she didn't hurt herself in her excitement. Even in a town this small, so late in the day, it was remarkably difficult to find a park empty enough for their needs. Don't wander too far, the brunette warned when he noticed the girl doing exactly that, disappearing into the nearby foliage with a riot of laughter. Eri. When she didn't respond, her giggles growing fainter, Kai sighed and went trudging after her. The Yakuza boss was glad he told Chrono to stay behind and make sure Eri's mess was cleaned up properly as he wandered through the bushes in search of the child's pure white hair. Knowing his assistant, the man would have laughed his ass off the entire time at the sight of his boss running around, making a mess of himself as he chases after his playing 5-year-old. The things I put up with for Eri? He thought as he resisted the overwhelming urge to rub his arms in a very likely futile attempt to remove the dirt, leaves, and that spiderweb he just walked through. W. Gross. All of the nope. From his person. Eri, please come back now. I'm really not in the mood for dashed. Kai cut himself off as he stumbled through a bush to find his daughter sitting with a girl in her teens who honestly looked like she had seen better days. Her curly dark green hair was a mess, half falling out of its high ponytail and full of leaves, probably not too different from what his own must look like right now, he mused. Her admittedly cute face and shapely body was littered with as many scrapes, burns, and bruises as there were tears running down her freckled cheeks. Kai actually felt a little insulted looking at her state. What kind of asshole beats up a girl in the park and leave them to rot? Actually, they beat me up at S-school. I just wanted T to be alone. Who are you? Oh. He said that out loud. Eri's excited voice brought the pair's attention to her as she smiled at the injured girl. That's my dad, the one I told you about. He can make you better with his quirk. It's awesome. The greenette smiled awkwardly at the red-eyed girl, her tone fond. So you've told me. Her attention shifted to Kai, nerves and embarrassment gripping her upon noticing his gaze fixed on her. I'm guessing you have some kind of healing or regeneration quirk. Eri didn't actually explain much besides, you can fix people with your quirk by touching them. The Yakuza boss snorted at Eri's extremely simplified explanation of his overhaul quirk. It's a little more complex than that, but yes, I can use it to heal people. If you don't mind. Before she could finish asking, he was kneeling in front of her, removing one of his gloves to touch her face. She felt a sharp jolt of pain for an instant, overriding the throbbing ache of her injuries briefly, before all her pain was gone. Looking down at her bare arms and mostly bare legs, she found herself good as new. Even the damage to her uniform was gone. How? The brunette helped her up with his now gloved hand. My quirk, overhaul, allows me to disassemble anything I touch with my bare hands and then reassemble it to my liking. When I use it on people, I essentially tear them apart at the molecular level and put them back together healthier than before. Kai was prepared for the ensuing freakout that always happened when he explained his affliction. People didn't like being pulled apart after all, but to his surprise the girl looked elated of all things. That's so cool. The number of uses it could have are practically limitless. In battle alone it could dash. Kai cut her off mid-ramble. Wait. You mean you don't mind that I just remade you? At all? It doesn't bother you? Oh. Why would it? Honestly, I wish I had a quirk even half as great as yours. Kai's curiosity piqued. He said a line those who knew him would immediately recognize as lying through his teeth. I'm sure your quirk is wonderful. Green eyes filled with tears, making the Yakuza immediately tense. Not crying. He can't handle crying. I don't have a quirk. Kai stared at the teen with open awe. She looked ashamed of her purity, her superior genes. Why are you crying? You're perfect, beautiful, a flawless human being. I wish I was like you. What is your name? The now violently blushing girl stuttered out, Midoriya Izumi. The brunette lowered the black medical mask covering his face to smile at her in a way that made Izumi's heart flutter. Chisaki Kai. It was a pleasure to meet you, Izumi. Miss, are you okay? Izumi looked up from her knees with a jolt and into bright red eyes. At first she panicked, thinking Bakugo, don't call him Kaken anymore, Izumi, had found her, but on closer inspection they were the wrong shade. Bakugo's eyes were a deep, blood red that were always angry or disgusted, surprisingly cold for such a warm color. These eyes were more of a warm pinkish red, like candy or the sky at sunset. They were warm and kind. They suited the cute little girl they were attached to. Her hair was long, wavy, and pure white in color with a single curved horn peeking from her right temple. Her outfit was a white dress that made her look like a doll with shiny black Mary Jane-style shoes and matching gloves on her hands. The first thought Izumi had was, unicorns are real, I have just met one. Oh my god, she is so cute. Thanks. You're really pretty too. Especially when you smile, the little girl stated as she beamed back at the green-haired teen. Oops. I said that out loud. Thank you, Eri. I'm Izumi, the teen replied with a sincere but watery smile, picking the leaves from the child's hair when it became obvious that she wasn't going to shake her offered hand. I like your name, it's really cool and it sounds cute. It suits you. Eri blushed at the attention, looking down at her feet sheepishly. Thank you. Your name is pretty too. It means spring, right? Yeah. The greenette said with a vulpine smile, and my surname is Midoriya. It had the desired reaction, the 5-year-old bursting into giggles. Green Valley Spring? Izumi joined in until her injuries protested, drawing a hiss of pain from the teen. Eri stared at the teen with obvious worry. Are you okay? I'm fine. It's not that bad. The white-haired girl's unimpressed stare and pointed look to the elder's obvious injuries was adorable, if only because you wouldn't expect an expression that adult from such a young child. Izumi smiled awkwardly. You're pretty smart. Most people fall for that. The younger girl puffed up in pride. Dad taught me how to read people so I can tell if they're lying. He says it's important. Very important, the teen agreed before wondering aloud, does your dad know you're here? You're a little young to be out this late by yourself. I made him chase me through the bushes, the girl explained proudly. He'll find us eventually. Then he can use his quirk to fix you. Fix me? Dad's quirk lets him make people better when he touches them, the child explained, eyes sparkling with excitement. It's really cool. Cooler than my quirk for sure. Izumi smiled and pet the other girl's white locks comfortingly. I'm sure you have a wonderful quirk, Eri. Any quirk can be good if you look long enough. Eri looked up at the teen, galaxies of emotion in her red eyes. But before she could respond to Izumi, a voice called out, Eri, please come back now. I'm really not in the mood for dashed. The pair's attention snapped to the source, a man with short brown hair stumbling through the bushes in front of them. This must be Eri's father. Izumi mused as she took in his appearance. He had a black medical mask over his face and medical gloves over his hands. Probably a doctor, or a germaphobe. He was wearing a green jacket with a dark fur trim on the hood over dark business attire, black button-up, black slacks, black belt, and a white tie. Despite his overt discomfort at the dirt and, is that a spider web? No wonder he looks grossed out. Most people hate spiders. Not Izumi, but she's been told she's weird. He still gave off an aura of power. Oh no. I'm crushing on a man I just met. Abort. Abort. What kind of asshole beats up a girl in the park and leaves them to rot? The brunette growled angrily. Izumi blushed, her heart melting a bit. No one had ever been mad on her behalf before. No, Izumi. But he's a dad. Cease your crushing immediately. Actually, they beat me up at S-school. I just wanted T to be alone. Who are you? The teen asked as she furiously beat down her raging hormones. Curse you, puberty. I haven't even seen his whole face. The pair's attention was shifted away from their intense stare down. He probably was just scanning her for injuries, not checking her out. By Eri's excited voice. The girl cuddled into Izumi's side as she explained what the teen suspected. That's my dad, the one I told you about. He can make you better with his quirk. It's awesome. The greenette smiled awkwardly at the red-eyed girl, her tone fond. So you've told me. Her attention shifted to Eri's father, nerves and embarrassment gripping her upon noticing his gaze fixed on her. It felt like her face was on fire, her heart pounding against her ribcage as she stuttered out, "I'm guessing you have some kind of healing or regeneration quirk?" Eri didn't actually explain much besides, "You can fix people with your quirk by touching them." The brunette snorted fondly, his eyes curving in a way that let Izumi know he was smiling. "I bet his smile is nice," she thought before catching herself. "No. Stop thinking about how hot he is. He has a daughter. He's probably married. It's a little more complex than that, but yes, I can use it to heal people," he explained with a fond tone in a very much attractive voice. "It is so unfair how hot he is. If you don't mind dash." Before she could finish asking, he was kneeling in front of her, removing one of his gloves to touch her face. She felt a sharp jolt of pain for an instant, overriding the throbbing ache of her injuries briefly, before all her pain was gone. Looking down at her bare arms and mostly bare legs, she found herself good as new. Even the damage to her uniform was gone. "How?" The brunette helped her up with his now gloved hand. "My quirk, Overhaul, allows me to disassemble anything I touch with my bare hands and then reassemble it to my liking. When I use it on people, I essentially tear them apart at the molecular level and put them back together healthier than before." Izumi's freckled face pulled itself into the biggest, truest smile she'd had in years as she gushed, "That's so cool. The number of uses it could have are practically limitless. In battle alone it could dash." He cut her off mid-ramble. Wait. You mean you don't mind that I just remade you? At all? It doesn't bother you?" The teen blinked owlishly. "No. Why would it? Honestly, I wish I had a quirk even half as great as yours." The man raised a brow before saying kindly, "I'm sure your quirk is wonderful." Izumi's mood dropped instantly, veins filling with ice water. It was happening, the conversation that drives everyone away. He was going to find out that she's broken. Eri was going to find out she's broken. As she panicked, her vision grew blurry. She was going to cry. Not wanting to draw out the pain, just get it over with, like ripping off a bandage, she blurted out, "I don't have a quirk." Izumi looked up warily, tears flowing down her face. She was ready to face the anger, the disgust that always came when someone found out she was quirkless. But it wasn't there. He looked elated of all things as he reached out to wipe away her tears. "Why are you crying? You're perfect, beautiful, a flawless human being. I wish I was like you." The teen blushed violently, unused to such compliments or positive attention, especially not from anyone she had a crush on. "What is your name?" he asked in a tone that sent shivers down her spine. "Midoriya Izumi." The brunette lowered the black medical mask covering his face to smile at her in a way that made Izumi's heart flutter. He was hot under that mask. "Chisaki Kai," he replied, looking at her like she was water and he'd been wandering a desert his whole life. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Izumi." Izumi's mouth went dry. She had no idea how to respond. Izumi.exe has stopped working. The teen was brought back to reality by a tiny hand grabbing her own. Looking down, she saw Eri looking up at her intently, eyes pleading, "Play with me?" Izumi smiled, lifting the child to rest on her hip as she walked. "Sure. Let's get out of the wilderness first though." As the trio moved, Kai staring at the teen with an undecipherable look on his face, Izumi glanced at him and struggled not to laugh. Reaching out with her free hand, the teen carefully removed something from the man's hood before placing it on a nearby branch. It was a long-legged black, red, and yellow spider that took up her entire hand. "Let's leave you here, Miss Joro. I doubt Chisaki-san wants to bring you home with him." "You would be correct," the brunette admits with a shiver. "I don't know how you can willingly touch that." The green-haired girl smiles at him. "Spiders are just misunderstood. They eat all the really bad, gross bugs for us, so I see them as a good sign. It means there are less pests here, like cockroaches or flies." Kai shivered at the mention of such vermin, but looked thoughtfully at the orb weaver. "I guess spiders aren't too bad. I still don't want to touch them though." Izumi laughed. "Fair." The park back in view, Izumi set the white-haired child back on the grass. Now, let's go play. As the two ran around laughing, Kai smiled, pulling out his phone to text Chrono his location. Come pick me up here in an hour? He barely registered his assistant's response as he lounged on the nearby bench, enthralled with the pure girl minding his daughter. It seems he found a solution to his problems at the park after all. Notes: if you're curious about the spider, there's a video of the exact kind and size here. https://www.youtube.com/watch?v=3ncgiopt.yw. Give it a look. This is coming along quick. Thank you all so much for your comments and support. I'm glad you're liking this. Next chapter, Izumi gets a job. The sun had just gone down when Chronostasis appeared, sans bird-like mask, with one of their cars outside the park. The girls, miraculously enough, weren't tired at all despite the fact they'd been running around for at least an hour straight on top of whatever else they'd done in this very long day. Kai knew that, for sure in his daughter's case and most likely in the case of the green-haired teen, the rest of their day had been very stressful. Izumi, the brunette called, gesturing for the girls to follow him. Noticing the elder's pink-tinted cheeks at the use of her first name, Kai felt a rush of satisfaction, but resisted the urge to preen like a schoolboy whose crush noticed him. He had better control of himself than to submit to such embarrassing urges. Where are we going, Chisaki-san? Izumi wondered as she carried his daughter to him at the child's insistence. Eri had never been quite so clingy to another human being before, not even himself, but the sight made the Yakuza boss more assured of his decision than anything. Odd, indescribable feelings be damned. Kai smiled and pointed her attention to the silver-haired man standing in wait just ahead of them. My assistant is here with a car to drive us home. I was hoping you would allow us to drive you home as thanks for entertaining my daughter. At the teen's responding nod he added, as if it were an afterthought, and you can call me Kai if you'd like. Izumi's face went redder than the child in her arm's eyes. She wasn't the only one shocked by his words, if his assistant's expression was anything to go off of. But quick as a blink the other man regained his composure as though he'd never lost it to begin with. Boss, the white-clad man greeted with a bow as he held the car door open, his eyes swimming with questions not aired. Kai gestured for the girls to enter first, smiling when the teen thanked him and bowed politely before she did. Catching his assistant's curious glance, the brunette snorted, "I'll explain later." Before they knew it, the car was moving to the teen's apartment, the girl in question thanking the Yakuza for the ride. Again apparently, from Kai's response. Chrono really couldn't wait for his boss' explanation, because this right here was surreal. Izumi, I was wondering if you would consider something? Kai asked, earning a smile from the teen so bright Chrono almost had to shield his eyes. Sure. The brunette stared intently into the girl's green eyes. I've recently found myself in need of a new caretaker to watch Eri. And I thought, given how well you handled her today, you would be a perfect replacement. Better even than her previous minder. The man wore a wry smile. I wish I could watch her myself, but my job is very difficult on the best of days and hardly suitable for her to come with me. Izumi wondered, head tilted in curiosity. Is Eri's mother unable to watch her as well? It seems unfortunate that you both have such busy schedules. Kai laughed. It would be were I married, but to answer your question, I'm the only parent Eri's ever known. I adopted her not too long ago because I saw value in her quirk where others did not. The girl got an intense look on her face as she turned to look at the child leaning against her. I just realized that I never asked what your quirk was. Eri worried her lip. Promise you won't think I'm weird? Do you think I'm weird for not having a quirk? No. And I won't think you're weird either, no matter your quirk. But if it makes you feel better, I'll promise anyways. The white-haired girl plays with the hem of her skirt as she explains, my quirk is rewind. It lets me rewind what I'm touching to a former state. If I use it on people, they lose their quirk, or they disappear. Eri started as a hand settled on her head, stroking her gently and moving a few strands behind her ear. I was right earlier when I said your quirk was wonderful. That'll be very useful once you manage to control it. The girl's red eyes sparkled as they stared up at the warm smile on the older girl's face. Watching the scene, Kai turned to Chrono as if to say, this right here is all the explanation you need, and it was. The man could see exactly what drew his boss to the teen, quirklessness aside. The girl was a literal fucking angel. Said Angel looked at the brunette and smiled. I'd love to. It'll probably only be after school and on weekends, and I'll need to figure out a way to your house, but that's fine. And as for transportation, my assistant here will pick you up from your school on weekdays and your apartment on weekends. I will? Chrono asked, dumbfounded. Kai's golden eyes fixed to him. Of course. You're the only one I'd trust with a job this important. Izumi seemed just as shocked with his words as his fellow Yakuza member. Thank you. I guess we should swap numbers so we can call each other? I don't really have much experience with this. As Kai plugged his personal cell, as well as Chrono's, into the teen's phone, the two introduced themselves. I'm Kurono Hari, Kai's assistant. A pleasure to meet you. Midoriya Izumi, I look forward to working with you, Kurono-san. Hari is fine, Midoriya. Then you can call me Izumi. Her cheerful response drew a smile to Hari's face. She really was a sweet girl. He'd better keep her away from the others if he can help it. The car stopped outside a simple apartment building, earning an embarrassed laugh from the teen. We're here already. Taking back her phone from the brunette, she gathered her bag and left with a cheery wave. I'll see you after school, I guess. The group waved back, Kai adding a soft I look forward to it, before they drove off. Izumi watched them until they disappeared from view, a lovesick look on her face. She was looking forward to it too. Notes: 2 of 11 Yakuza have fallen for the teen's charms. Stay tuned to see how she wins them all over. And soon Dad for one and the League will start appearing too. Next chapter, Inko discovers that her baby has a job and she has some questions. Thank you all so much for your comments and kudos. It means a lot to me that you all are enjoying this. Laughing face. Inko had worried when her daughter wasn't home before the sun had set. Not that Izumi being late home was anything new. The teen would spend hours hero watching whenever she had the chance, eager to watch heroes and villains alike to add their quirks to her ever-expanding collection of notebooks. It drove the green-haired woman mad, knowing her daughter had such a dangerous hobby. But Izumi loved analyzing other people's quirks. It was one of her few and most precious pastimes growing up, and Inko refused to take the only thing that keeps her baby smiling anymore away. She could live with a little stress from waiting for her every day. It's better than when she tried to play with Mitsuki's boy. At first Inko thought her husband was being his typical, overprotective doting father self when he complained about how Katsuki treated their daughter. She swore he'd threatened death upon the at-the-time toddler if he hurt Izumi a few times when he'd been there for the two's playdates. Mitsuki and Masaru thought it was cute while Inko had to cover her husband's smoking mouth with one of her hands. An exasperated, Hisashi, you know not to breathe fire in the house. You'll set off the fire alarm, said with an expression a little too fond to be truly upset. Over the years, however, she came to realize Hisashi was valid in his concerns. Once Izumi was diagnosed as quirkless, the boy and his friends turned their roughhousing and light teasing and fun into something horrible. Her little girl would come home battered and bruised and burnt more often than not. The teases that were once in good fun were now insults meant to hurt and tear her down, and then her nickname changed from Aizuchan to Deku. The longer it happened, the worse it got. Inko started to despise that boy and his friends. She still liked his parents. They'd been her friends for ages, and she knew they hated his behavior as much as she did. She saw how hard trying to rein in their brat of a son was for them thanks to all the undue praise he got from his school, his peers, everyone else really. There was nothing any of them could do but hope the two kept avoiding each other as much as possible. Just as Inko was about to wear a hole in the floor from her worried pacing, her daughter came in through the door, completely undamaged and clutching her phone to her chest with a giddy smile on her face. It had been ages since she'd seen her baby so happy. Welcome back, sweetheart. Something good happened today? The teen blushed as she took off her shoes, the smile not dimming in the slightest. I met someone today. Several people actually. They were nice and I had fun. They moved to the dining room, the elder greenette pausing to grab their food from where she was keeping it warm, the oven. Once they were sitting, finally eating dinner, Izumi continued, Kind have a job as a babysitter now. I mean, I agreed to watch Eri-chan after school and on weekends instead of hero watching. She's a sweet girl and her father's a doctor. I think. Inko had expected something interesting when her daughter mentioned meeting new people, but this was Izumi. The teen looked at her mother, mouth full of food, and immediately tensed upon seeing tears. Are you okay? Are you upset about Dash? Upset? Heavens no. The woman raced around the table to envelope her daughter in a bone-crushing hug. My baby has a job. Oh, this is wonderful, Izumi. Her baby would be safe and indoors with a sweet little girl instead of out on the streets looking for danger. And she isn't even upset about losing out on her very dangerous hobby. She looks excited to babysit. Inko could weep, she's so happy. Correction, she is already weeping with joy. Once she'd managed to calm down, Izumi wiping away her own sympathy tears, Inko sat back down and dinner resumed. Only the occasional probing question about her daughter's new employer to keep the conversation flowing. The woman learned a lot through their conversation. Her new client, Chisaki-san, is someone important, likely a doctor of some sort by her daughter's trained eye for information. His job keeps him too busy to stay with his daughter as much as he'd like, so he's hiring Izumi to do so when she can. Eri, his daughter, is adopted and he is unmarried, hence the lack of spouse to watch her. The way Izumi talked about the man left Inko resisting the urge to pinch her daughter's rapidly darkening cheeks. She was starting to worry that she'd never have the joy of experiencing her baby's first crush. It was cute, but hardly surprising, that her Izumi had developed feelings for the first man to view her as the wonderful girl she was. The fact he was a doctor, a good father, and had a cute face only added fuel to the fires of hormonal desire burning in her belly. Inko, having been in a not-so-different position with her own husband in the past, reserved judgment. If Izumi finds her new boss attractive, that's fine. If her new adult boss does anything with her daughter that is not PG-rated, kisses, hand-holding, or less, in the time between now and when she comes of age. Hisashi wasn't the only one in this family who can spit fire when they're angry. As Izumi washed her bowl before going to her room for the night, Inko called, Izumi, I'm proud of you. And I know your father will be too once he finds out. The teen blushed, thanks Mom. Do you mind if I tell Dad myself? It's been a while since I talked to him. Inko smiled, shaking her head. Go ahead. I'll call him to gush about your new job with him tomorrow. The two shared a brief hug before the younger left, pulling out her cell phone as she closed her door. As she lay down on her very All Might-themed bed in her All Might-themed room, she heard the click signaling that he'd answered. Hey Dad. Hello Izumi. How's my little girl doing today? Good. I met some new people today. They were nice, and the two whose quirks I found out have the coolest quirks I've seen. Ever really? Oh, she could hear his intrigue on his voice even through the line. What were they? One could rewind a person's physical state, rendering them quirkless or erasing them from existence. The other could break apart and reform anything he touched with his bare hands. He called it overhaul. Her father made a noise that sounded vaguely impressed, followed by a whistle. And these new friends of yours were nice, you said? Yeah. They didn't mind that I was quirkless at all. One of them, he said I was a perfect, beautiful, flawless human being, to quote him exactly. Her father's laugh was as much of a surprise to him as it was to Izumi based in the coughing fit that immediately followed. Are you okay? Fine. Just... Wow, he made what sounded vaguely like a snort, and he was serious. Yep. Izumi chirped happily, popping the pea. It's nice to know my princess is being treated as she deserves by someone besides me finally. The greenette blushed, not even minding her father's embarrassing princess comment. There's more. Oh, guess who has a job now? She sang cheerily. No, he barked with an excited laugh. Yeah. I'm watching his daughter now after school and on weekends. She's the one with the rewind quirk. It's gonna be fun if today's any indication. Sure enough, Mom was right. The first thing her father does upon finding out is coo about how proud he is. And all Izumi can think as her father continues to sing her praises to her over the phone, telling her how much he wished he could go through the phone and pull her into a hug right now, is that today really was a great day after all. Eri was practically vibrating with excitement when she woke up this morning. Today she would spend her afternoon with Izumi. The girl who thought her quirk was wonderful. The girl who was gentle and kind and fun. The girl who was everything the 5-year-old had imagined having a mom would be like. With how hard her dad was trying to be nice to the older girl, Eri could tell he thought so too. Maybe someday, if she's lucky, the green-haired girl would be her mom. God, Eri hoped so. With a brief moment spent to brush her hair and teeth that had become second nature since she'd been adopted, the one-horned girl ran the short distance from her own bedroom to her father's. Opening the door, she found him still asleep, arms thrown akimbo and blankets half off of him. She rarely saw the man so unkempt. Resisting the urge to laugh at his state, she steeled her resolve and ran up to do what she'd intended all along. Kai woke with a start as the air was forcibly pushed from his body. Groaning, his gold eyes opened to look up into the far too proud of herself face of his daughter. The child sat on his stomach, which she had apparently launched herself on top of to wake him, and called to him in a repeating stream of "Dad us" and "Get up us." She was bouncing with an excessive energy that the Yakuza boss honestly envied right now. "Someone's excited today," he stated with a yawn, running a hand through his hair. "What's the occasion?" Eri gave him that face, the one he himself makes whenever one of his subordinates says or does something particularly stupid. The brunette would be impressed if he had any idea why she would be leveling it at him. "Dad?" she explained as though he were an idiot. "Izumi's coming here today." Once his brain managed to register her words, he kind of felt like one. "Izumi." Hugging his daughter to his chest, Kai sat up, burying his face in her pure white hair. "I can't believe I said something so stupid," he laughed into her scalp, earning a giggle back. Once they'd calmed down, the brunette pulled back to look at Eri's elated face, gold eyes locking with red. "Let's go get some breakfast?" The first thing anyone noticed at Orudra Middle School that morning was Midoriya. Not that that was new. They were used to watching her get pushed around by Bakugo and his friends, seeing her cry or mutter to herself as she scribbled in her notebook. No, what drew their gaze today was something most of them had never seen before. She was glowing with happiness. Her classmates and teacher more than anyone were struck by just how cheerful she could be. She helped one girl gather her fallen books, offered a spare pencil to a boy who complained about forgetting his own, and said good mornings and hello this as she made her way to her desk. All the while she wore a smile bright enough to light up the room. Was she always so sweet? Late as ever, Bakugo strolled into the room and immediately tensed, taking in the girl's chipper attitude with visibly building rage. For once his peers felt scared for the quirkless girl. Was this the girl they would have seen all the time if only they stopped him, even once? The thought made the teacher feel ill as he did something he'd never done before. He scolded the blonde for his tardiness and told him to sit down. From her seat near the back, Izumi took this all in with no small amount of awe. For once in her life, Izumi's day at school was pleasant. It was bizarre. Everyone's intrigue at this noon Midoriya only grew when they saw her go up to a man in a white suit standing in front of a fancy black car. The man opened the door for her with a bow and drove her off somewhere. Izumi meanwhile was sharing a pleasant conversation with Hari about his quirk, having convinced him to talk about it by flashing him the cutest puppy dog eyes he'd ever seen. The silver-haired man smiled as she rambled affectionately about his quirk, giving him a few pointers he'd never considered before. "You're very good at working out quirks and their abilities," he noted as they pulled up to the large and elegant building that functioned as their headquarters, smiling at the teen's open amazement at her surroundings. "It's a habit my dad and I share, watching heroes and villains fight and breaking down their quirks. Uses, limitations, possible drawbacks, etc." Her green eyes sparkled with excitement. "Does Kai really live here?" "It's amazing." Hari led the teen through the halls of the traditional Japanese mansion, smiling as he explained, Kai was taken in by the man who previously owned this house as a child. His upbringing, and later my own, was very old-fashioned. Most of our higher-ranked, he paused for just a moment to think of a suitable word, co-workers live in the property in the outer wings or outbuildings, while Kai, Eri, and myself live in the main building here. Kai offered his home to his co-workers? The teen wondered aloud. The Yakuza elite smiled fondly. Many of our colleagues have difficult lives due to the nature of their quirks or upbringing. Kai gave us a place to stay and jobs to do. He refers to our organization as a family. For most of us, this is the only family we've ever known. Turning to look at the emotional girl behind him, Hari finishes, the boss has a bit of a habit of collecting strays and keeping them. When the greenette's response was to tear up, Hari panicked. Oh no. He made her cry. That was the scene Eri and Kai walked in on, Izumi crying with Chrono flitting around her in worry. What's going on here? Kai asked with a bit of edge to his voice that sent his assistant paling. He was saved, however, when the teen waved off the three's concern, wiping her face with a tissue she pulled from her yellow backpack. It's not his fault. What he said was actually really sweet. I'm just a crier. I swear, once I cried watching a cereal commercial. It's embarrassing. As the others shared a sigh of relief, Kai closed the distance between them, placing his hand on the small of the girl's back. Thank you, Chrono. I can take over from here. Izumi let the brunette lead her. Eri latched to her side and face aflame, as she forced out a squeaky thanks to the silver-haired man. As they disappeared from sight, Hari laughed to himself. Kai probably doesn't know it yet, but one of these days that girl will be his wife. And as he strolled to his room humming the Yakuza, smiled at the thought. Kai had taken Izumi on a tour of the entire main building, pausing to let her take in the frankly gorgeous garden in the back. It had an impressive koi pond with a wisteria tree growing next to it, while on the opposing side, after a large expanse of grass, there stood a large, likely ancient, sakura tree. Adding in the Japanese quince bushes and flower beds around the outskirts of the garden, and Izumi was certain this area was a sight to behold in spring. She also knew where Kai, Eri, and Hari's rooms were now, though she had yet to see inside the latters out of the three. Before she knew it, Hari had returned to grab Kai for business work, apparently, based on his wording. Izumi had apparently guessed wrong about the brunette's career. Looks like germaphobe was the proper answer all along about the mask and gloves. At that realization, all she could think about her new boss personality quirk was cute. As the pair left, the single father added absent-mindedly that the teen was free to explore the house to her heart's content and reminded his daughter to do her homework. Left alone, the girls looked at each other. Before the silence could stretch too long, Izumi asked, "You want to do homework together? If we get it out of the way now, we'll have the rest of the night to have fun." Eri's resulting smile was heart-melting. Izumi was impressed at how advanced the 5-year-old schoolwork was, though upon asking why she was less surprised. Eri had mentioned before that her dad was teaching her, but the greenette never put two and two together to realize the man personally homeschooled his daughter because her quirk made normal school difficult. By the time they'd both finished, it was close to dinner. "How long do you think your dad will be gone for?" Izumi asked as she packed their work away. Eri hummed a while. "Definitely after dark." "Why?" The elder girl checked her cell phone's clock again before she replied, "It's close to dinner. I was wondering if I'd need to cook, and apparently the answer is yes." As she made her way to the kitchen, she tied up her hair in a bun, turning to the child in her care as she surveyed what she had to work with. "How good are you with spicy food?" "I've never eaten it before." "Is it good?" "Very. But it's better to work your way up to spicier foods than jump straight in." The teen put some rice in the rice cooker and grabbed some ingredients that seemed random to Eri, who watched the greenette eagerly. "What are you making?" "Curry and rice. Not too spicy for now, just enough to have a bit of a kick." As she diced the meat and vegetables carefully under the girl's enthralled gaze, she added, "If you want, I can teach you a little cooking later. Mostly bentos and other simple things, but dash." "Yes, please," Eri yelled, cutting her off. "I want to learn. It looks fun." Izumi chuckled, smiling fondly as she saw her younger self in the white-haired girl's exuberance. She was about Eri's age when she'd said those exact words to her mother and Auntie Mitsuki. The parallels made her flush a little. Here I am comparing mine and Eri's relationship to mine with my mother. I shouldn't like that as much as I do. But as she watched the child take a bite of her dinner, eyes sparkling with awe that food could be so tasty when it's just spicy enough to make your mouth tingle, she couldn't bring herself to care that she treated the girl like a daughter. It was just what felt right. After dinner, Izumi put the leftovers away and ran after Eri, chasing her through the massive building in a makeshift game. She didn't have much experience with games, and neither did the 5-year-old, so they made do with whatever popped in their minds until their seemingly infinite wells of energy ran low. By then the sun was setting, but they still had time to burn before Kai came back. So, for the second time that day, Izumi's mind flashed to something she'd done with her family. It was late. Izumi should have been asleep ages ago, but her mind was working too much for her to actually sleep. The toddler got up to get herself a glass of water, careful to be quiet so she didn't wake her parents, only to see a faint light from the living room. Curiosity piqued. She moved to check why and saw her father sprawled lazily across the sofa. His dark eyes looked just as tired as her own as they scanned the people on screen, heroes and villains on the news, before flitting to a notebook by his hand on the arm of the sofa. "What cha doin'?" she asked as she climbed into his lap, earning a chuckle. "You're supposed to be asleep." She shrugged. "Can't. Brain's too busy." The man ran his fingers through her short green hair, as messy and full of curls as his own, a smile on his face. "Sorry. Looks like you take after me in that department. Want to know how I get tired? I put on the news and use it to analyze the quirks I see." The black-haired man held up his full notebook. "It's a hobby I started a long time ago that I can't seem to shake. Want to help?" "Sure." They spent ages. It felt like watching hero fights and compiling info together. Most of the time Inko would wake up to find them both passed out together on the sofa, notebooks full of quirk details on the floor nearby. It was one of the few memories of her father Izumi remembered with crystal clarity. "Want to help me with a hobby of mine?" Izumi asked as he pulled out her newest notebook, sitting on the couch and turning on the TV. Eri's excitement was palpable. Chrono resisted the overwhelming urge to clasp his hands together and pray as they returned home, because the fact they'd hired Izumi couldn't have been a bigger godsend than it was in this moment. Their afternoon was a shit show. Anything that could have gone wrong did go wrong, and as a result Kai was wound tighter than a spring. But the second they walked into the living room, the teen welcomed them home from her seat on the nearby couch, asking how work was sweetly, like a doting housewife, and the tension visibly melted from the brunette as though it were never there to begin with. "Stressful," he summarized as he took in the girl's appearance. The teen had her curly green hair up in a high bun instead of the ponytail she'd had it in when they left. She had Eri's head resting in her lap, and she was taking notes on the hero fight currently airing on the news. Kai sat down next to her, smiling at his sleepy but not yet asleep daughter as she commented on the hero's poor form sassily. Izumi apparently found her commentary just as amusing, because she added it next to her own notes in red ink. "What's this, if you don't mind my asking?" Kai questioned. From his standing position behind the couch, Hari was equally curious. It was Eri who answered. "Izumi's teaching me to analyze people." "She's a good teacher?" said Greenette, blushed, rubbing her neck nervously. "I'm really not. Eri's just a fast learner." Chrono smiled. "This is that hobby you mentioned earlier, the one your dad taught you?" he asked, earning a nod from the teen. "Dad used to do this with me all the time when I was little. Watch heroes and villains fight on the news and break them all down. Taking what we could work out of their quirks, fighting style, personality, and anything else of note and writing it down in one of these." She held up the notebook she was using to be further analyzed later. Kai held his hand out. "May I?" Izumi closed the book and handed it over, growing increasingly nervous as the man browsed her work. "You got all this from news footage?" the brunette wondered, his tone pleasantly surprised. Hari moved to read over his boss's shoulder, eyes widening as he did. "Most of it, yeah. Why?" The silver-haired man whistled. "These are thorough. They're impressive is what they are." Kai added as he handed the book back. "You have a gift." A satisfied smile stretched across his face as he took in the girl's rapidly darkening cheeks. "Thanks." She stuttered self-consciously, "But these aren't that impressive. My dad's notes are better. I look forward to meeting him then." "What?" Izumi asked, blinking owlishly. Kai clarified. "I said I look forward to meeting him because if your words are anything to go off of, he sounds like a great man. And a genius, because I honestly can't imagine how you can outdo your work." Deep in his evil lair, for the first time since he'd lost his nose, all for one sneezed. Back at the Yakuza headquarters, Izumi quickly changed the subject to avoid fainting from the excess blood flow to her head. "Did you two eat?" "To work, I mean, 'cause I made food. If you're hungry." Smooth Izumi. That wasn't obvious in the least. Thankfully, Hari had her back. "I could eat." "Kai." "Dinner sounds lovely, The brunette agreed as her gathered up his sleepy 5-year-old from the teen's lap. I'll be back once I've finished putting this little lady to bed. Adjusting her so her head was pillowed on his shoulder, he stood. Say good night, Eri. Night, the girl yawned. Good night, Eri. I'll see you tomorrow, Izumi said as she got up to get their food ready, waving as she passed. Sweet dreams. Kai could feel his daughter's return wave as he walked. He wasn't sure why, but everything the girls did together seemed so much cuter when it was both of them doing it. As he changed Eri into her nightgown and tucked her in, he was struck by how much easier it was now that the elder girl had worn her out. Good night, Eri. Dad? The child's words, while sleepy, were no less meaningful. I like Izumi. Can she stay? Stroking the girl's white-locked head, the man smiled fondly. I like her too. So maybe one day. As he got up to leave, Kai smiled. Leave it to his daughter to be the first to ask. She's too smart for her own good sometimes. But as the Yakuza boss sat down with his assistant and the amazing, wonderful, pure girl he'd met by chance, enjoying the simple but delicious meal she'd made and sharing pleasant conversation, he smiled to himself. One of these days, if she'll have me, I'm going to marry this girl. Izumi and the others got into a routine fairly quickly. Get up. Izumi goes to her now far less awful day of school while Kai homeschools Eri. Hari picks Izumi up and drops her off at the house before leaving with Kai. Izumi spends time playing with Eri. The girls cook, Eri learning simple skills and watching the elder girl work her culinary magic. Izumi and Eri relax by doing some quirk analysis until the boys come home. Eri gets put to bed. Kai and Hari enjoy a home-cooked meal despite the late hour because Izumi is a goddess among men. Izumi, Kai, and Hari enjoy pleasant conversation. Hari brings Izumi home. Everyone goes to sleep. And then they wake up and do it all over again. It was simple, but it was nice. It was theirs. Nearly a week had gone by in this routine. The first weekend shift was on the morrow, and that knowledge left all of them giddy, excited, and full of nerves. Currently, Kai and Hari were sitting at the kitchen table, the former struggling not to laugh at the scene before him. I can't believe you've never eaten katsudon before. This is a crime. No, a travesty. Izumi, it's not that bad. You really don't have to go through all this trouble to cook something new. The leftovers are more than enough. Hari insisted, guilt lacing his tone as the teen worked herself into a frenzy cooking them a meal from scratch. Fresh food for once, rather than the leftovers from her meal for Eri. Kai mentally noted to eat those for lunch as he hid his smile behind the hand he was resting his face on. Chrono didn't realize how futile his efforts were, but the brunette saw perfectly. Izumi wasn't going to let this go. When the silver-haired man got up to try and offer assistance, the teen fixed him with toxic green eyes, brandishing her wooden spoon at him like a weapon. Oh. You, sit down, she ordered, sending a chill down Kai's spine. His assistant complied, mouth snapping shut as he took in her serious expression. I know I don't have to feed you, Hari. You're a grown-ass man. I'd be more than a little surprised if you didn't know how to cook at least a little. I'm doing this because I want to make you something. I don't have many people to share this with, you know. Just you guys, my mom and my dad, before his work sent him out of the country. I like cooking for the people I care about, and that includes you too, so shut up and let me feed you the best dish on the face of this earth. Kai didn't even bother hiding his smile this time as he watched the teen turn back to the stove. Honestly, he didn't even care that she thought a meal as sweet and unhealthy as katsudon was mandatory. It had bothered him initially, though he'd resolved to eat it anyway just to spare her feelings, that her favorite dish was something so guilty pleasure and junk food in nature. It was hardly a surprise, given her age, but it was worrying. But now he realized it was the intention behind the offer that left him warm inside. She was sharing her favorite food with them, cooking for them because she cared. She liked them. If he were a cat, he'd be purring. The brunette's pleasant mood evaporated when the familiar black and white jumpsuit of Mimic ran into the room. And as the tiny, bird-like figure proceeded to scurry up to him and loudly complain about how some of their new clients screwed them over and that the last shipment was watered down, we shouldn't buy from them anymore, the Yakuza boss screamed internally. Who's this? Izumi asked curiously from the kitchen, curious eyes locked on Mimic's odd figure, Is his appearance part of his quirk? 'Cause it's really cute. Kai wanted to die. The earth opening up and swallowing him whole sounded lovely right now. Chrono, ever the voice of reason, took control of the situation. It is in a sense. Izumi, this is Iranaka Joy, he manages our personnel and finances. His quirk allows him to possess objects and manipulate them as he desires. Joy, this is Midoriya Izumi, the boss hired her as Aries' new minder. The teen flashed a million-watt smile. It's nice to meet you, Iranaka-san. Your quirk sounds very useful. Would you like something to eat? I'm making katsudon. Mimic blinked a few times, taking in the surprisingly domestic scene he'd wandered into before replying, sure. Thanks. No problem. As the bookkeeper moved to sit next to Chrono at the table, slipping out of his jumpsuit and into his real form reluctantly, he took note of his boss' expression. He gulped when he saw the raw anger pointed at him in those golden eyes. We'll continue our business conversation later, understood? The light-haired Yakuza, despite his larger frame and build, nodded like a scolded child. As the teens set 4 bowls on the counter, sitting next to the boss to eat with them, the light-haired Yakuza member was in for another shock. Didn't you already eat dinner? The brunette asked with a tone that was equally amused and concerned. You know you'll make yourself sick if you eat too much? The brunette paused in her eating, already halfway through her bowl. With a moment spent to swallow her mouthful, she replied sassily, I know my limits. 1 bowl won't kill me. Worst case scenario, I'll get fat. Hardly the end of the world when no one's interested in a quirkless nerd like me anyways. Joy mentally noted that. It explained why his boss found the teen worthy enough to watch his daughter. Confused and more than a little weirded out, the built man dug into his meal, and immediately felt his taste buds sing. He practically inhaled his food, a smile stretching his face. Cute, a killer cook, and she thought his quirk was cool. This girl was something else. Midoriya. Marry me, the man blurted, his tone awed. Chrono choked on his mouthful next to Joy while across from the two Kai and Izumi's reactions were very different. Izumi flushed red like a stoplight, stuttering out a flattered, thank you for the offer Iranaka-san, BB, but I'm not old enough to for marriage yet. And the boss. Kai was livid. If looks could kill, Joy would be beyond dead right now. Shit. He fucked up. It's all good, Midoriya. I meant it like a compliment. Like, your food is so good I could marry you just so I could have it all the time. The teen and his boss relaxed at that. Phew. Crisis averted. Thank you, Iranaka-san. Izumi said with an angelic smile before turning to the less rigid, but still glaring overhaul. Are you enjoying it, Kai? Jesus Christ, she's on a first-name basis. That was close. The brunette locked eyes with the girl and smiled at her with a level of tenderness he typically saved for Eri. It's amazing as always, Izumi. Keep this up and Joy won't be the only one proposing marriage, and I'm perfectly willing to wait for someone as wonderful as you. His voice took a teasing tone near the end that sent the girl blushing up a storm even worse than before. She let out a strangled squeak. That's good. The teen laughed nervously as she adjusted her black uniform. Is it hot in here? It feels hot in here. Hari once again came to the teen's rescue. I'll turn on the AC in the car, help you cool down. Good. Thank you, Hari, the brunette said as she put their dishes in the sink. We'll go after I wash these. I've got them, you go ahead. Kai insisted, walking the girl to the door with his hand on the small of her back. From his seat, Joy watched this with no small amount of awe. His boss was really into this Izumi chick. It was mesmerizing. All right. See you tomorrow, Kai. Before she left, Kai pressed a kiss to her cheek. Good night, Izumi. The teen flushed, expression going soft and lovesick. Gee, good night. As Chrono walked off with the girl, leaving Joy with their now smug boss, the light-haired man smiled. This was probably the sappiest thing he'd ever seen in his damn life, and he didn't even care. All he cared was that his boss was happy. Hell, even he and Chrono were happy, and it was all because of that girl. Drew Izumi and the spider on my DeviantArt. Give her a look if you're curious. When Izumi got home, Inko knew something big had happened. Her baby's face was scarlet and dreamy, and she had randomly sighed or giggled the entire time she prepared a bag for her first full day with Eri-chan tomorrow. The telekinetic woman had to know why. With a simple application of her pull quirk on the puzzle box in her daughter's hand, she drew her attention. One brow raised, an expression amused. Inko mused with a knowing lilt to her voice, "Someone's excited about something. Did something happen at work tonight?" Izumi sighed dreamily, flopping back onto the sofa dramatically in a way she definitely got from Inko. "I met another of Kai's coworkers today. Irinaka was nice, and he joked about my food being worthy of marriage proposals." Inko covered her mouth to hide her smile. "And what did Shisaki-san say about that?" "He agreed. Said he'd wait to be able to marry someone as wonderful as me." As her daughter hid her flushed face behind her hands, the woman clasped her hands and prayed this was actually going as good as it sounded. Her little girl deserved to be happy. It seems her prayers were answered, because the next words out of Izumi's mouth were, "He kissed my cheek when he saw me off tonight. Hisashi is going to die when he hears about this." Inko pulled Izumi into a hug when she noticed her daughter's expression, resignation and pleading in equal measure. It was like the teen had read her mind as she whined, "Please don't tell Dad, you know how he'll react." "I do, but you know he'll be worse if he doesn't hear about it from one of us." At the younger's groan, the mother laughed. "Don't worry, I'll make sure he doesn't get too bad." Her daughter buried her face in her chest as she hugged back, smothering the quiet "thank you." She said a little. Hari wasn't really sure what he expected when he knocked on Izumi's apartment door that morning, but the sweet woman who answered the door and welcomed him inside was more than he'd ever imagined. The woman, Inko she insisted he called her, was like a slightly shorter, chubbier version of Izumi with lighter, straighter green hair and no freckles. She even smiled and cried at any and all emotional moments like Izumi did. "It's nice to finally meet you, Kurono. My Izumi doesn't really have many friends, so thank you for being one of the first." The woman teared up for far from the first time in the few minutes the Yakuza had been here. Sorry. I almost made myself cry again." Dash. A crier?" At her nod he smiled. "Izumi got that from you then. And I'm glad she sees me as one. She's a sweet girl. You raised her well." At the silver-haired man's words, Inko blushed. "Thank you for the compliment, but that's all Izumi. She's always been a sweetheart." It seems Izumi wasn't the only one used to flattery. "Hari!" Izumi exclaimed excitedly as she joined them in the living room. "Sorry for the wait. I was in the middle of getting ready." Taking the girl's appearance, the man smiled. "Kai is going to swallow his tongue when he sees her." Izumi was wearing her hair in a French braid that had a brown ribbon covered in fabric sakura blossoms weaved into it, a tan and pink floral print skirt that was a little shorter than the black one on her uniform, a flowy white tank top covered by a loose knit brown cardigan that was left open and ended around the girl's knees, a pair of creamy white thigh-high socks that left only an inch of visible skin on her thighs, and a choker necklace that looked like a fancy leather cat collar. It even had a little cat paw tag and bell on the loop at the front. Noticing the man staring, she flushed in embarrassment. "Too much?" Hari shook his head. "You look great. I was just thinking about something else. Don't mind me." Bowing politely to her mother, he grabbed the teen's very full yellow backpack before moving to the door. "Thank you for your hospitality, Inko. I promise to ensure your daughter's safe return." The greenettes blinked at his serious tone on such an intense vow. Inko responded with a warm smile. "Thank you, Kurono. I appreciate it." Once she was left alone, Inko shook her head with a fond smile. "Why am I not surprised? Oh, Izumi, it looks like you inherited your mother's taste in friends in more ways than one." The woman reminisced about her own friends, the closest of which she hadn't seen since Izumi was born and missed dearly, as she sat on the sofa and pulled out her cell phone to call her husband. The second Hisashi picked up the phone, Inko spoke. "One of Izumi's work friends and I had a nice chat while we waited for her to get ready today. Kurono was a sweet man. He even promised to personally ensure Izumi's safe return." And the bow he made as he did gave me a good peek at that interesting tattoo on the base of his neck. She heard her husband sigh over the phone and continued pointedly, "Would you mind telling me how long you've known our daughter was fraternizing with Yakuza, dear?" "Since she called me to tell me about her job." He admitted guiltily. "Her boss is the current head of the Shai Hasaikai." Inko let out a bark of laughter. "She really did inherit my tastes. You do realize that she's hoping to marry him once she's able to?" The man groaned. "I know. And for that I'll play nice." For now, at least. If that Yakuza expects me to just hand our princess over, he'll be in for a rude awakening. I expect groveling. The green-haired woman laughed. Oh, you aren't the only one. He needs to prove himself to each of us before I'll agree either. Inko smiled fondly. If they do get married, we'll be quite a family. This time it was Hisashi's turn to laugh. Kai ran a hand through his short brown hair as browsed his closet, mind running through a million ideas on how to win over Izumi's parents. Eri watched her dad fuss over which of his numerous, extremely similar button-up shirts to pair with his black slacks today with mild amusement that she didn't bother to hide. You could not wear a shirt, show off your pictures? The man shook his head fondly at his daughter's naive suggestion. He couldn't bear tattoos at the teen now. They're very stereotypical of Yakuza and might scare her off before he has a chance. Besides, it would be improper to walk around half-dressed. He would admit though, as he viewed his reflection in his closet mirror, his tattoos were beautiful. He bore the symbol of his Shai Hasaikai in black on the left side of his stomach, just above his hip. It was about the size of his palm and the simplest of his collection, but was no less attractive to look at. Taking up his back was a phoenix with plumes of vibrant jade, gold, and vermilion. It was perched among blooming sakura branches that stretched to overlap the back of his left half sleeve, which was a koi pond filled with several red, white, and black fish dancing around each other gracefully. In comparison, his right half sleeve was made up of a coiled mamushi snake, brown and striped in pattern, among peonies of various colors. All in all, he was a walking work of art. One would think that he, a severe misophobe, would find the process of inking one's skin permanently distasteful. They would be wrong on that assumption. The inks used by his preferred parlor are safe, naturally based, and made with either ethanol or purified water. The tattoo gun and area one is inked in are sterilized thoroughly between customers, and the ink is handled in a way that ensures it remains uncontaminated as well. Ink pots and needles are new and sterile every single time and are not reused. While the tattoo is fresh, it is wrapped to avoid infection and kept that way until healed, with only the exception of the once-a-day application of moisturizer to keep it clean and properly healing. Tattoos can be done clean. It's very easy to get them that way actually, just expensive. Kai would rather his work be done well than cheap any day. Shrugging, he grabs a dark pine green button-up for the day. When Chrono walked through the door, Izumi on his heels, Kai immediately felt his mouth go dry. Her outfit, despite revealing very little skin, was remarkably sexy. He could only see a sliver of thigh, her hands, and most of the area from just above her cleavage to her face, save for what little of her neck that collar she was wearing covered, and holy fuck, don't get him started on how hot that collar was, but that in itself only seemed to make those glimpses of skin all the more exciting. To top it all off, the first thing his daughter said when she saw the teen was, "You match." Izumi's wearing brown and has green hair while Dad's wearing green and had brown hair. Well, she wasn't wrong. The pair burst into laughter at the realization. What are the odds? Remarkably low, but I suppose luck plays a part? Kai responded as he reluctantly pulled on his fern green coat. He really wanted to stay and watch the girls all day, but his work couldn't be skipped. Before he left, Izumi returned the favor from last night, kissing his cheek as she wished him a good day. The brunette blinked as his brain fully registered what just happened. Flushing pink and tongue-tied, he stuttered out, "Thank you, Izumi. See you later." As he walked out to the car, he noticed Chrono pointedly looking away, struggling not to laugh. "Shut up." His assistant, wisely, said nothing. Izumi smiled as she sat with Eri in the living room, pulling out several boxes from her bag. The younger girl's red eyes sparkled when they took in the puzzles and board games. "You brought all these to play with me?" she asked, voice heavy with emotion. "Yep," the greenette replied, popping the pea. "I also bought you one of these, since I like to play with my own a lot." The gift in question was a small cube made up of several smaller cubes. At Eri's curious look, the teen explained, "It's a Rubik's Cube. You see how there's 6 colors? Each color is supposed to fill a side. You're supposed to turn the cube like so." She paused to demonstrate with a few movements until all the sides are complete. "Just don't be disappointed if that takes a while. It's surprisingly difficult." Eri didn't seem deterred by the warning in the slightest. If anything, she looked determined to solve the cube as quickly as possible. But she put it down to grab one of the 1,000-piece puzzles on the table. "You're teaching me to make bentos today, right?" she asked as she dumped the contents onto the dark wood surface of the table in front of them. Izumi smiled and set the box lid to the side of the table so they could see what it should look like for reference. "Right again. I'm thinking the kind that are cute and fun. I'm also going to show you how to make tamagoyaki, but until you're old enough to use the stove you'll just be watching for that part." "That's fine," the white-haired girl said as she rapidly grabbed border pieces out of the pile and assembled them. "I found a corner." "Me too. I think you have the top left and mine." She glanced at the box lid briefly. "Is the bottom left?" The pair spent a couple hours on that puzzle, just relaxing and enjoying each other's company, but now they were done. The end result was a gorgeous watercolor painting of a bunch of colorful jellyfish on a white background. Eri found it particularly fascinating. "I didn't know jellyfish could be pretty. I should take you to the aquarium sometime. The one near my school has a room filled with tanks for different kinds of jellyfish." The 5-year-old's eyes sparkled. "Are there lots of fish there?" Izumi smiled as she noticed the child's enthusiasm. "All kinds of fish, some sharks and rays, an octopus. They even have some dolphins and seals last I checked. They might have more since last I visited. It's been a while." As they tidied up the puzzle, Eri excitedly asking a million questions about the aquarium and all the animals in it, the teen smiled. "Maybe Kai will be able to come with them when they go. We are going to get in so much shit for this if the boss finds out." Setsuno muttered as he and the other 7 expendables snuck into the main building of the house through the gardens at the back. Rappa, sick of the blonde's whining, hissed, "Not if you don't find out we won't. So shut up before you get us caught." "Sorry." The group peeked around the wall and got a good look at the girl they'd been referring to as the boss wife ever since Chrono and Mimic warned them not to mess with her. She was short at 5'0", with dark green hair braided nicely and an outfit that was cute as all hell, and looked a little on the young side. I never pegged over Ho as a pervert," Rappa commented as he watched the girl tidy up after her game with Eri. None of the others said anything about his use of the wrong name for once, as his words weren't exactly wrong for once. The teen had to be at most 16, if that, and there was no denying that a grown man flirting with a girl that young was more than a little perverse. "Oh shit," Hojo hissed as he pulled the others back behind the wall, earning more than a few shoves from the action. "What gives, asshole?" Rappa growled as he towered over the bald man aggressively, earning a whispered, "I think she spotted us." "I did." The group turned to gape at the tiny slip of a girl in shock. How the fuck did she sneak up on them? Word to the wise, if you're trying not to be spotted, don't talk or move too much. Also, some of you were too tall to hide properly. She motioned to the floor and section of wall visible from the living room, drawing their attention to the Rappa and Rikiya-shaped shadows there. "You must be Kai and Hari's co-workers." "That's one way of putting it," Shin replied, a little caught off guard as she smiled and continued, "Honestly, thanks to his quirk, I'm Midoriya Izumi, but you can just call me Izumi. It's nice to meet you all. Do you want to stay and join Eri and I for lunch?" Once he released his quirk's compulsion to tell the truth, she blinked, looking at all of them with excited eyes. "Did one of you just make me talk with your quirk?" The spectacled man raised his hand. "I did. Apologies, but I like to ensure those I talk to are truthful." "That's so cool. It must be very useful, Nemoto Shin. And thank you." The men were more than a little surprised as she led them into the dining room, chattering candidly and full of excitement over their quirks as they were explained as if they were the most amazing abilities in existence. Katsukame Rikiya's vitality stealing? Rare and extremely useful for tiring out opponents in battle without causing harm. "I like it." Setsuno Toya's larceny? Good for stopping thieves or disarming an attacker while steering clear of any danger. It would also make grabbing something from across a room much faster. Hojo used crystallization? A great defensive quirk with very little visible drawback. Perfect for protecting others and really cool to look at. Sakaki Didoro's sloshed? Would be the perfect way to know your friends were having just as much fun as you at a party, even with differing alcohol tolerances. You'd be very popular at clubs and bars, I think. Tengai Hekiji's barrier quirk? Another quirk excellent for defense. You must be very good at stopping fights peacefully. Rappa Kendo's strong shoulder? Great for hand-to-hand fighting, heavy lifting, and anything else one could use their arms for really. You'd kick some serious ass as a professional fighter. I did actually. I switched from ring fights to here cause I elbowed him in the gut to cut him off, earning a dirty look from the bigger man. The boss man kicked my ass in the ring. That's never really happened before, so I stick around here for the chance to beat him someday. Izumi paused in her gathering of cooking supplies in the kitchen nearby to gaze at Rappa with open disbelief. Kai beat you in a fight? At his responding nod she spaced out a bit before shaking herself back to reality. The entire time the Yakuza could practically see the gears turning in her head as she tried to logically explain it. Were quirks allowed in the ring? Yeah, it was underground. Pretty brutal actually. The rush was worth it though. The others internally screamed at Rappa's words. Leave it to him to say the least acceptable thing possible. But to their surprise the teen didn't bat an eye, continuing in a light tone that would explain how Kai beat you. I'm guessing he used his quirk to disassemble you and then put you back together once his win was logged by the judges, as though she were talking about the weather rather than the very serious matter of Rappa's brief yet very real period of non-existence at the brunette's hands. Once the brawler confirmed her suspicions, she turned her gaze to Tabe. And you? What's your quirk? The messy, black-haired man blinked at her. His voice came out quiet and vaguely hysterical, as it always did, as he muttered out, Tabe Sormitz, my quirk is called food. I eat and eat and eat. Always hungry, never full. At his response the teen had a sympathetic but no less warm smile on her face. That must be hard, always being hungry. You can still taste everything though, right? Yeah. The greenette leveled him with a curious look. Would you mind helping me test my recipes? I like to experiment with my cooking and it's nice to have a second opinion sometimes. They're never bad, so you won't have to worry about that. It's just nicer to share meals with friends, you know. She got flustered and started muttering nervously, I mean, if you want to be friends. Sorry for just assuming you'd accept. I'm kind of bad when it comes to talking to people. Rambling puts most people off and I'm a huge nerd that asks invasive questions about other people's quirks. But if you want, I'd like to be friends, Sorry. I'm rambling again. I'll shut up now. Sorry. Tay blinked again and smiled. Despite how unsettling it looked, the teen smiled back no less sweetly. At the ravenous man's quiet "I'd like that?" Her smile brightened, leaving the group clutching their hearts dramatically. She was so fucking cute. Eri meanwhile stood next to Izumi in the kitchen, on top of a stepstool so she could reach the counter, with a growing smile. Izumi deserved to have friends, so as long as these ones were nice to the teen, Eri would be happy. Tugging on the greenette's skirt she asked, "What are we making?" Green eyes locked with red and turned playful before returning to the men. When was the last time any of you ate a homemade bento? They were curious but replied honestly. Izumi wasn't surprised when the unanimous answer was, a long time. She smiled like a fox. Well, we'll just have to fix that, won't we, Eri? The girl smirked back as the boy's curiosity grew. As the teen pulled out a bunch of bento boxes, a few of them caught on to her implication. You aren't planning on making one of those for each of us, are you? Setsuno exclaimed as the teen taught the younger girl how to properly use the rice cooker. That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm also going to set aside 3 more. Kai, Hari, and Irinaka can eat those once they get back. As they sat and watched just how much effort she was putting into this, the Yakuza all thought, this girl is an angel. Joy walked into the main house with open worry. Well, as much open worry as his puppet body's face would allow to show. He had returned about an hour ago to keep an eye on the others for the boss, knowing them too well to trust them to leave the girls alone. His fears were apparently valid, since he hadn't been able to find the 8 menaces anywhere they should have been on the premises. He had hoped he would have been able to keep them busy until Overhaul got back, but apparently it was too late for that. Tiny body flooded with adrenaline, he raced into the living room, worried about what he'd find and hoping the girls were fine. And he walked into the strangest thing he'd ever witnessed in his already very strange life. All 8 Yakuza elite were seated at the dining room table with the girls, a pile of freshly emptied bento boxes stacked neatly next to the kitchen sink. Izumi was setting up a board game in the middle of the table while the men talked amiably, Aside from the half-assed bickering over what piece belonged to whom that inevitably happened in these circumstances. The greenette noticed his unique form and perked up Irinaka. Hey. She pointed to the fridge, there's a bento for you in the fridge if you're hungry. Want to join our game? Aries opted to sit out and a few of the guys are just watching, so there's room for you if you're interested. As he unfroze and moved to grab his lunch, she sang teasingly, if you join I'll let you be the banker. It was then, having shed his jumpsuit and sat down across from the girl between Shin and Tengai, that he realized what game they were playing. You're playing Monopoly? We used to be playing Go Fish, but it was getting a little boring after a while, the teen explained, coaxing a laugh from Rappa beside her. That's cute, considering that you and the kid consistently kicked our asses. From her seat in the older girl's lap, Eri grinned smugly as she fiddled with her Rubik's Cube. Izumi meanwhile flushed with embarrassment, rubbing the back of her neck nervously with a chuckle. I'm just lucky. I still swear you cheated. Setsuno stated as he finally won his argument over which piece he would be, the dog of course, as if he was going to be the fucking boot. Shin chuckled, we already checked Setsuno, the only one who cheated at all was you. Or did you forget? The blonde glared at the dark-haired man with a pout. I hate you. The lack of venom in his tone left the others ignoring him with fond smiles. Joy chuckled and placed the boot down, grabbing the bank. Fuck it, I'm in. Izumi's smile was worth whatever headache he'd get keeping the others' cheating fingers out of his stacks of vibrantly colored bills all game. Kai and Chrono weren't sure what they expected when they got home today, but this definitely wasn't it. Izumi was grinning like a shark as she accepted a wad of vibrantly colored bills from a shell-shocked Joy. Rikia and Rappa were roaring with laughter on either side of the teen while all the others were either weeping dramatically or whooping excitedly. Eri, despite being in the teen's lap, was very much absorbed in the Rubik's Cube in her hands that she was well on her way to completing. What is going on? He asked curiously, more confused than upset by what he was seeing. Everyone turned to stare at him at his question. Eri replied everyone wanted to see Izumi, she made friends, and we played some games. Rappa added gleefully, and this girl here straight up destroyed us every time. She won every round of Go Fish and beat Mimic at Monopoly. The massive man caught the teen in a headlock, rustling her hair playfully, I like you kid. Izumi freed herself from the brawler's grasp with a smile, it's not that big a deal. I'm good with numbers and analytical activities, add in the tips my parents gave me on business and finance management and you can understand why I'm good at games like these. If you really want to see brutal, you should see my family's games of Risk. Dad is a mad genius when it comes to battle plans and Mom uses her telekinesis to cheat. Kai walked up to the table and craned over the greenette's shoulder to watch his daughter. Where did she get a Rubik's Cube? I bought it for her. Izumi admitted as she looked up into his golden eyes, I have a few myself so I thought she'd appreciate the challenge. I'd say you're right considering how intent she is on solving it. As they put away the game, the Yakuza stared at the two's interactions as if transfixed. The way they smiled at each other, their body language, even their fucking small talk was like they were a couple who'd been married for years talking about their kid. When they saw how young Izumi was, they assumed their boss was just into younger girls. Weird and a little creepy, but far from the worst thing they'd seen. But now they saw it was different. The pair were into each other despite their age gap, not because of it. Kai talked to Izumi like an equal, which spoke volumes to them about how much he valued her. Izumi meanwhile was eager for companionship and acceptance, as they noticed from talking to her, but clung especially hard to the boss. As they watched they understood that the brunette was probably the first person outside the girl's family to treat her with kindness. Tabe, Shin, and Setsuno more than anyone understood why people would treat a girl so sweet like shit. She was quirkless, and quirks meant everything nowadays. But the realization left a sour taste in their mouths. Hey Kai, the man hummed as he swapped places with the teen, holding Eri in his lap as Izumi stood to get started on dinner. I was thinking of taking Eri to the aquarium sometime soon, is that all right with you? The child in question paused in her puzzle solving to stare up at him with pleading red eyes. The Yakuza boss signed internally, why can I never say no to that adorable face? Sure. I'm free tomorrow, so we can go then. The 5-year-old's beaming face made his heart melt. As he noticed his men's amused faces, none more so than his assistant, he growled quietly, "Shut up." Chrono rested his cheek on his hand as he openly grinned at his boss. "We didn't say anything." "Yeah, well, you're thinking it." Joy snickered. "You mean the fact that you're straight up skipping work tomorrow to do something for the girls is adorable? Or did you mean the fact that they got you wrapped around their fingers to the point you can't refuse them anything? I swear, once you and Izumi get married for real you are going to be so whipped." The others laughed, or tried not to, as Kai's eyes narrowed. "Joy, you have 30 seconds before I chase you down for that. I suggest you make them count." Before anyone could make an attempt, Izumi butted in. "No, you won't. Please sit and relax, Kai, there's no need for threats in the house." The other Yakuza struggled not to laugh at their boss' open embarrassment, but before they could laugh in earnest the teen continued, "And the rest of you leave him alone. You're adults, you know better than to be rude to your host in his own home. The fact he's your boss makes your behavior all the more shameful. Look at them, cowed into behavior by a woman smaller than all of them and significantly younger. Looks like their boss isn't the only one who'll be whipped once she's his wife." The thought, strangely enough, bothered no one. I posted a ref image for Kai's tattoos on my DA, so feel free to look at them. When he went to pick up Izumi for their outing date at the aquarium the next day, Kai became acquainted with her mother. Inko was simultaneously exactly what he expected the teen's mother to be like, and not at all what he expected. As he sat on the couch and chatted with his potential future mother-in-law while waiting for Izumi to get ready, Eri asking her a million questions, likely the reason she was taking so long, the woman stated seriously, "I never thought I'd be giving this talk to a Yakuza boss, but I expect you to treat my little girl with respect, young man." Gold eyes fixed the small woman with open shock, earning a laugh. "Relax, Overhaul, I'm not your enemy here. How do you dash? My husband is very familiar with the darker underbelly of our world. He's known who you were since Izumi gushed about you and that job you gave her on day one." Inko shrugged, crossing one leg over the other and folding her hands in her lap. "I meanwhile worked it out after I spotted your assistant's lovely neck tattoo yesterday. So, what exactly are your intentions regarding my daughter?" The brunette swallowed, decidedly less sure of his plans to win the woman over now. "I intend to ask your daughter to marry me once she's of age," he admitted, telling her his intentions bluntly. "She's a remarkable girl and I want nothing more than to see her happy." Green eyes peered into gold as the mother smiled. "I do too. That's why I'll just let you off with a warning." Her expression was glacial as she continued, "I expect you to behave yourself until after you're married, whether that be when she's 16 or 20. So if I find out you've done anything more than kiss my little girl, well, organs count as small objects. I'm sure you're creative enough to see how I could use my quirk on yours should you decide to ignore this warning." "Yes, ma'am," he replied with a shiver. "Good," she chirped cheerfully as the girls entered the room, oblivious to what had happened in their absence. Izumi was wearing a preppy blue dress that had a star pattern that made her look like she was wearing the night sky that was flowing and cut off at the knees, a pair of black tights, and a long necklace made up of a black string with a silver star pendant at the end with matching stud earrings. Her curly green hair was down for the first time since he'd met her, reaching her mid-back, with the exception of her bangs, which were held back with a blue handkerchief headband, the knot looking a bit like bunny ears at the top of her head. "God, she's even more adorable than last time," Kai thought as he took her in with a smile. The giggle he heard from the teen's mother next to him and amused look on her face reminded him that she was there, causing him to flush. "You look wonderful, Izumi." The glowing smile he received was worth the embarrassment. "Thank you, Kai." Picking up Eri, who was also wearing a deep blue dress, after slipping on her bright red sneakers, the teen waved goodbye to her mother. "Bye, Mom. See you later." The brunette slipped in his own white sneakers and bowed to the woman respectfully. "Thank you for having me, ma'am. I enjoyed our conversation, it was enlightening." "Likewise," the elder woman replied with a sweet smile. "Don't you be a stranger, young man. I'd like to get to know my future son-in-law and granddaughter beyond names, after all." "Mom," Izumi exclaimed with a red face, earning a laugh from the woman, "I'm your mother, Izumi. It's my job to tease." Groaning, the teen pulled the equally red-faced Yakuza boss out of the house. "This is far larger than I expected," the brunette stated as they finished paying. walking into the main room of the Muzutafu Aquarium to take in the massive aquarium inside with no small amount of awe. He didn't know you could make a tank big enough to keep whale sharks, but there were 3 of them slowly dancing around a small mountain of coral-covered rock. The many schooling fish sharing the area glittering silver in the imitation sunlight from above the water. Izumi giggled as she watched both Kai and his daughter stare at the spectacle with the same impressed look on their faces. It is pretty amazing what they can do in public aquariums. I take it you've never been to one before? No, the man replied honestly, glancing at the teen. Luckily I have you to guide me. The greenette blushed but played along. Well, if I'm playing tour guide today then we should get moving. There's more to this place than a whale shark tank, impressive as this one is. Eri grabbed the teen's hand as they moved, Kai following close behind. The doorway she led them through was actually a tunnel through another large tank, this one filled with colorful reefs and reef fish. Lionfish, damselfish, tangs of all sizes and colors, there was even a moray eel. As the trio paused to admire their surroundings, a shadow fell over them, causing them to look up. It was a shark, a reef shark with dark-tipped fins and tan-colored skin. On closer inspection there were actually several of them circling the reefs lazily. As Izumi took that moment to explain the many fish and their names to his daughter, Kai stared at her fondly. She really was beautiful. He was pulled from his daydreaming as the girls started walking, shaking himself back to reality as he moved to catch up before they noticed he'd lagged behind. The room they walked into was mostly empty but had circular tanks in the walls with plaques beneath them explaining the fish inside. Upon inspection the Yakuza noticed that each had a small colony of either clownfish or seahorses, with each window being a different breed or species. The way Eri's eyes got progressively more excited left him torn. On one hand he was glad she was so happy, on the other hand he knew she was going to start begging for a pet again. He knew that pets were going to be a constant struggle with his daughter ever since she first laid eyes on the pond in their home and asked if they could fill it with koi. Well, at least she likes fish. He didn't know how he'd handle if she was a dog person. Speaking of koi, the next room had several ponds in it one could view from above via wooden bridges designed to mirror the Dragon Gate myth. Kai had told this very tale to Eri many times before bed, as it was one of her favorites, so he was unsurprised when the child started telling the story to Izumi gleefully. The brunette admired the way the teen listened to the younger girl's brief but no less exciting telling of the carp that became a dragon by swimming up a waterfall and jumping over the high wooden gate at its peak. You could tell from her face that she was familiar with the tale, but she still listened to Eri's telling wholeheartedly. It was sweet. The next room continued the theme of Japanese legends by holding 2 exhibits, one for catfish and the other for giant salamanders. The somewhat familiar tales of the catfish Namizu, who sleeps beneath Japan and causes earthquakes, and Hanzaki were especially captivating when told by Izumi. Eri had offhandedly mentioned that both were kind of funny-looking, but in a cute way. As they entered the next room, Kai resisted the urge to groan at Eri's squeal of delight as she ran up to the glass. Apparently he'd spoke too soon when he counted himself lucky that she only liked fish, because his daughter was utterly besotted with the turtles in the talk in front of her. Red-eared and yellow-bellied sliders, painted and snapping. Turtles each had their own tank. The fact the displays noted that these species were popular in the pet trade but hard to care for did not escape his or Eri's notice. There was a long conversation about pets in the near future, he could tell. And he knew that he was probably going to lose. Maybe he can get her to settle for just one tank for her room, preferably not one with a turtle inside. With his mind so focused on his daughter's inevitable new pet, the Yakuza barely noticed that they had changed rooms until Izumi patted him on the shoulder. Kai, are okay? You spaced out a bit there? The brunette blushed, thankful that the dim lighting of the aquarium probably hid it. Yeah, just thinking about something else. The pair returned their gaze to Eri, who was flitting from one tank to the next excitedly. First was the giant Pacific octopus, whose exhibit was themed like a sunken pirate ship based on the treasure chest and shipwreckage to function as a hiding place. Next she was in front of the flamboyant cuttlefish tank, the cephalopods inside really living up to their name with their ever-shifting vibrant colors and patterns. Then she was watching a tiny blue-ringed octopus crawl through a tiny clear tube that separated one tank full of colorful reef from another with slightly different corals. After a brief pause to eat at the, luckily, nearby food court, they continued. As Kai and Izumi followed Eri into the next room, side by side, Kai was struck with the realization that to anyone watching them they probably looked like a family. The greenette looked a little more mature outside of her uniform, based on her dress and behavior, and with how they were standing together and keeping track of his daughter at a more sedated pace than the white-haired child was moving, it would be very easy to assume they were a couple. The brunette smiled at the realization as they stopped to join Eri in front of a tank of electric eels, linking his hand with Izumi's and delighting in the way she flustered at the action. When she ducked her head in embarrassment but threaded their fingers together, his smile widened. Eri meanwhile watched the two's interaction with an internal victory dance from her position in front of a piranha tank before grabbing the teen's free hand to lead them to the next room. Today was going great. Izumi had enjoyed herself so far, taking a particular delight in the way Kai's golden eyes would light up the same way his daughter's red ones did upon seeing each display. The only time his mind wandered that she'd noticed was in the turtle room, which, judging from the thoughtful yet resigned look he was sporting, was likely to do with Eri's utter enchantment with the animals that were clearly labeled as a common pet. Clearly he was not looking forward to that conversation and already trying to plan his excuse for why the 5-year-old couldn't have a turtle. The greenette almost felt sorry for him. Maybe she can talk Eri into an alternative, she liked those clownfish well enough. And now she was holding Kai's hand. He just casually grabbed hers while they were admiring a tank full of exotic fish, electric eels, and smiled at her. When she threaded their fingers together, heart pounding in her chest and throat clogged with emotions, he looked even more happy somehow. And then Izumi realized, this was a date, they were on a date right now. She had never been so happy in her life. As Eri pulled them into the next room after grabbing her other hand, the child noticed what room they'd entered and let out the most adorable squeal of delight the teen had ever heard. It was darker in here, the only lighting coming from the tanks themselves. The teen smiled as the white-haired girl raced to stand in front of the first cylindrical tank of the room, bathing in the first of many colored lights painting the area in a faint rainbow. The yellow glow she was under complemented her as well as it did the sea nettles drifting gracefully inside the glass. Kai turned to Izumi with a raised brow. I didn't know she was so fond of jellyfish. Did you? It's why she wanted to come here in the first place. Yesterday I did a puzzle with her, which was a painting of jellyfish, and she was taken with how pretty they were. Once she'd finished explaining, the brunette turned to stare at the creatures himself. I guess they are rather nice to look at, he admitted as they moved to the next tank, which was full of mauve stingers in pink and purple lighting, as he finished relaxing. After watching each type of jelly, moon, cauliflower, crystal, white-spotted, flower hat, upside down, blubber, manowar, cannonball, blue, CB, and a giant tank taking up one wall filled with Nomura, the trio moved on, though the youngest kept looking back wistfully. The next room, however, was different. This one had a low pool filled with small rays and other sea creatures in an imitation tide pool, only free of any potentially dangerous encounters one could have in a real tide pool, that had a sign nearby. Touch us. Kai looked decidedly less on board with this idea as they got closer, though Eri had already stuck her hands in, intent on touching everything but still being gentle. Izumi stuck her free hand in to curiously stroke a circular ray flying by and immediately gasped, Kai, you have to try this. They feel so soft. With a brief moment spent to remove the glove from his free hand, the other still linked with the greenette's own, with his teeth he tentatively dipped his hand in to comply. The way his eyes widened as the creature glided under his palm was immensely satisfying to the teen. Wow. He breathed as he repeated the action again before finally retracting his hand. They really are soft. Pausing to disinfect their hands, Kai would not budge in that was public water that countless people had stuck their hands in. They moved to the next room, only this time it was Izumi's turn to squeal in delight. They had a baby. In the massive tank swam 3 orcas, 2 adults and 1 much smaller baby. As she vibrated with excitement between them, Kai and Eri shared a look. Izumi really was adorable. As they watched the tiny calf, likely very young based on its size, playfully swim around her mother and father, Izumi's eyes sparkled. Baby orcas were rare, especially in captivity, and it was clear that the teen was beyond excited to see one. On their way out they had saw a sign for the newest edition that would be opening here next year, a separate outdoor area for dolphin pods. Supposedly one of the pods in that exhibit would have a pink dolphin. Kai didn't know dolphins came in pink. The brunette had hoped they would have made it out without being dragged into the gift shop, but Eri rushed inside the second it was in sight. Thank God Izumi could handle his daughter's begging without immediately caving, because he certainly couldn't. Eri now had a backpack shaped like a turtle shell that was filled with every book on sea life she could find on the shelves here, a large stuffed orca cuddled to her chest that was as tall as she was, and a new umbrella tucked between her back and the backpack that looks like a jellyfish when open. It would have been far more, but the greenette had talked the girl down to only what she absolutely needed. And it really wasn't the teen's fault that the 5-year-old could reasonably explain how she needed what they did get. The bag was actually useful, as were the books and umbrella. The toy was the one thing he caved on despite her having no way to explain why. She needed it other than look how cute and soft it is. And as long as she carried it all herself, Kai was willing to get it. His men were going to laugh when he gets home, for being so utterly and completely whipped, but that was inevitable. At least his girls were happy. After walking Izumi back home, surprised that the sun was already setting, it didn't feel like they'd been out that long, the brunette kissed her goodnight. Mindful to stay on the cheek still, the girl's mother's warning from this morning fresh in his mind, before the teen was bold and pulled him into one a little more passionate, if inexperienced. Good night, Izumi, I'll see you tomorrow. Good night, Kai. As the door shut and he glanced down at his smirking daughter, he smiled. That went well. Eri's giggle as they strolled to make their way home was music to his ears. Something's been up with Deku, and Katsuki wants to know what. The blonde had been trying to catch the nerd alone for weeks now, sick of her cheerful bullshit and eager to put her back in her place, but any time he tries, the side characters in this school get in his fucking way. It's really starting to piss him off. Since when did these extras think it was their place to judge him? As the days passed, though, Katsuki started to notice something interesting about Deku's new schedule. Every day the quirkless wonder was picked up by the same fancy car by some dude in a white outfit with arrows for hair. More often than not there was another man waiting with him that the green-haired girl would smile at with that stupid fucking smile of hers and chat with all buddy-buddy. It made him want to throw up just looking at that kiss-ass. But after a few days of this, the boy noticed that the second man was never the same person 2 days in a row. One day it was a huge super buff dude that looked like he barely fit in the damn car. The next it was some guy with a wide as fuck toothy grin and bug eyes. Then some stuck-up dick with glasses. And then a blonde with an emo haircut. Then a different buff dude with long wavy hair. Then a bald guy with creepy eyes. Then that weirdo with the long black hair that was drinking sake as he waded straight out of the bottle. Then it was a dude with spiky hair that kept his eyes closed and was wearing a fucking kimono of all things. Or that tall fuck with the spiky hair and scruffy face that dressed like a businessman. More often than not it was the brunette with the medical mask on his face. Katsuki had seen that man at their building a lot, coming in and out of shitty Deku's house. Sometimes he'd have a kid with him. Sometimes he'd take the nerd out somewhere. The teen didn't know where exactly, but he had a suspicion. It probably wasn't true, given his surety that Auntie Inko would have skinned all those assholes alive already if they'd so much as thought about it. But it would work well as a way to keep Deku out of UA. They wouldn't accept a kid with a record after all. As the blonde left for school early, eager to get his new plan in motion, he smirked. That nerd didn't know it, but what he was doing was for her own good. Izumi had no idea what happened, but for some reason the people at school were being weird. The girls she passed would sneer at her or giggle and wave mockingly, the male students would point at her and smirk or wink for some reason, and all of the teachers looked at her with this vaguely disgusted and disappointed look. Even when everyone bullied or avoided her as though her quirklessness was somehow contagious, they had never acted this strange. So what gives? The teen's confusion only grew as her homeroom teacher, who had been kind to her ever since she'd gotten her job, looked at her with open disdain as he coldly told her that she was to go to the principal's office immediately. Izumi's classmates giggled at that, whispering amongst themselves gleefully as she left. The walk to the office was silent and anxious, leaving the greenette a ball of raw nerves as she finally reached her destination. "You wanted to see me, sir?" the teen asked quietly as she entered the room, freezing like a deer in the headlights as she took in its occupants. Midoriya? The old man stated seriously as he motioned for his guests to move. Said guests were police officers, which flanked the greenette on either side. Your employment has come to our attention due to the actions of a friend and classmate of yours. As you should know, such acts are frowned upon in this school. Izumi's confusion grew exponentially as one of the officers slipped handcuffs on her as the man continued. Now, you'll go with them down to the station and pay for what you've done. If you're smart, you'll admit what you did and name your clients and boss when you're there. It'll make things easier on you. I don't understand. What's going on? She asked with a watery voice, eyes tearing up as she was dragged out by the firm grip on her shoulder. What did I do wrong? I don't understand what's happening. As she was dragged out sobbing and asking what was happening over and over, never once receiving an answer, a pair of blood-red eyes watched from the window with open satisfaction. From his seat, Katsuki smirked smugly. I guess she's not going to be a hero after all. How sad for her. The dweeb will thank me someday, once she realizes it's for her own good. Tsukachi was confused as he was led to the interrogation room at the Mizudafu station. From what he could tell, the officers here were having particular trouble with a child prostitution case, the girl in question sticking to a story and refusing to talk about anything. They were hoping his lie detector quirk would be able to sniff out the truth, he guessed. That was usually why he was called into interrogations, though this wasn't his usual kind of case. But as he entered the room and laid eyes on the terrified, weeping girl still in her school uniform, during school hours, a bitter seed of doubt laid root in his heart. Midoriya Izumi? He asked as he sat down, posture relaxed. The teen, probably not even 15 yet, locked tear-filled green eyes on him. I'm Detective Tsukachi Naomasa. Do you know why you're here? No. Honest. Tsukachi frowned and clarified. Did anyone tell you what you're here for? While they read you your rights, perhaps? The teary greenette sobbed once before speaking, and no one told me anything at all. They just cuffed me and dragged me out of school. I asked them over and over what I did, but all anyone said is that I should confess and make things easier. She let out a watery and hysterical laugh. Confess to what? The black-haired detective frowned, his doubts growing. She was still being totally honest. It was rare that he met someone totally truthful, but he had yet to detect even a slight hint that anything she'd said was false at all. This was looking rather bad. Turning to the one-way glass that her previous talking partners were behind, the detective held his arms up in a shrug. What exactly did you want me to ask specifically? 'Cause so far she hasn't lied at all. A voice sounded over the comm in the room, a little tense in tone. We wanted you to ask about her job. Name her boss and clients. Turning back to the teen, he smiled. Well, Midoriya, you heard them. What's your job like? Your boss? I'm a babysitter. And that actually stung once he realized what had happened, further confirmed as she continued, my boss is a businessman who's a single father, so he can't stay and watch his daughter for long periods of time. I don't have any other clients, but him and his coworkers are nice. They don't think I'm weird because I'm quirkless, and they support me in my goal to go to UA and be a hero. No one else really does. They think I'm stupid for trying. This girl was completely innocent. Someone had set her up to ruin her record and her dreams of heroism in one fell swoop. Tsukachi felt like he was going to be sick. Detective? Izumi asked, now far calmer than she was before. Why am I here? The man cringed and told her up front what had happened. Your classmate, a boy who referred to himself as your childhood friend, made your school aware that he had concerns about you and your new career. He noticed her tense, a knowing glint in her eyes. The school called us to investigate, as he had said it was something else which is heavily frowned upon and punished. What did Bakugo accuse me of? The teen asked, expression somewhere between nauseous and angry. I need to know. Please. Tsukachi frowned but complied. He accused you of prostitution, with multiple older men. At first Izumi was blank, cold and void of expressions. Next came indignation and anger, which barely lasted a second. It settled back in sadness, crying like she'd been before. Only now her wails were painful, agonized and dripping with despair. That was when he knew the teen had realized why he'd done it and what it would mean for her. Her childhood friend had ruined any chance of her achieving her dream in the most spiteful, vicious way possible. The detective moved to comfort her, patting her shoulder, only have the greenette latch onto him and sob into his chest. Stroking her hair as she wept, he stood there, a pillar of much-needed strength in her moment of agony. It's okay. It'll be okay. And he'd make damn sure this was fixed. As Tsukachi made some calls, and yelled at his coworkers that handled her case improperly, after the teen's newest bout of crying had finished, Izumi sat, now free of handcuffs, in the detective's office at the station. She leaned back into the surprisingly comfy swivel chair as she scrolled through her cell phone's contacts. The greenette knew she should call someone to vent about what happened and get a ride home. But she didn't know who to call. Does she call her mother first? No. She'd freak out when she finds out, maybe hunt Bakugo down like a jaguar hunting a gazelle before skinning him alive. Izumi would come home to find the blonde's head mounted on the wall as a trophy. Her dad wasn't much better an option. Despite his physical distance, being in another country and all, she wouldn't put it past him to find a way to have the explosive teen roasted alive for his transgressions. He had vowed to do that if the blonde ever hurt her, physically or otherwise, every time he saw the boy in her childhood. And Midoriya Hisashi was a man who kept his promises. If he knew he might not be able to do something, he said so upfront, even if it was painful. It was one of the things Izumi loved most about her father. The teen's mind flashed to Kai. How would he take this? They'd been dating for a couple months now, since their date at the aquarium. When she'd asked him about it, she discovered that her mother wasn't completely joking when she teased her and Kai about them getting married someday. He had apparently asked her mother for her permission to marry her. The brunette was upfront about his intentions since before their date, though she had taken it as a joke at the time, and continued to let her know that he wasn't going to change his mind anytime soon. He wanted to marry her. For real. Would he still feel that way after this? Sighing and having cried too much to produce any more tears at the moment, she reluctantly pressed his number. Better to get this over with? Izumi, he answered, confusion evident in his voice. Why are you calling me during school hours? Are you okay? Not really. I was arrested. The greenette heard a sputtering noise, followed by a coughing fit. Apparently Kai had been drinking something when she'd spoken. Once his coughs had run their course, he replied, for what? You're basically an angel. Promise not to freak out? I promise nothing. Well, that was fair. The teen supposed, as she reluctantly admitted, one of my classmates accused me of prostitution to smear my record and reputation. Detective Tsukachi's trying to fix it now, but it isn't looking too great. Noting the man's silence, Izumi gulped and stuttered out, Kekai? Are you still there? Yes, he said blankly, voice tense. I'm coming to get you. The officers around her snapped their attention to her at the outburst, causing her to flush and apologize before continuing quieter. You don't have to do that. Bullshit, he replied in an almost offended tone. We're engaged, Izumi. Your problems are my problems. You don't deserve whatever trouble your dickbag of a classmate got you in, so I'm coming to you and fixing this. Got it? Izumi laughed, expression fond. Thank you, Kai. Don't thank me yet, I'm bringing Inko. Kai, wait. Don't dash. She trailed off as she noticed the dial tone, signifying that he'd already hung up. Groaning, the teen leaned back into the chair, staring blankly at the ceiling. Tsukachi, who had returned in time to catch the end of her. Cole asked, boyfriend? Fiancé, the greenette corrected, earning a look of surprise. With a shrug she clarified, he asked my parents for permission to marry me on the stipulation he behaves himself until we're married, whether that be when I'm 16 or 20, to quote my mother. The detective smiled at her, reserving judgment until he'd met the girl's betrothed in person. I take it he isn't too happy? Oh, he's pissed. But it isn't him I'm worried about. Izumi cringed. He said he's bringing my mother with him. Tsukachi winced sympathetically. The only person more vengeful than an angry spouse. Well, spouse to be in your case. An angry mother. How bad will it be? Green eyes lost focus as she shivered. Let's just say you won't want to be in Bakugo's shoes once she finds out this is his fault. Bad then. Good to know. You may want to nail some things down. Izumi's strange words of warning were about to be questioned when a woman that was very obviously the girl's mother stormed in, a young brunette man close on her heels staring at her with visible wariness. Despite the green-haired woman's slightly shorter and curvier frame than her daughter, the smallest person in the room until now, she gave off the presence of a hurricane in human form. Perhaps earthquake was more appropriate, given how everything in the room started to rattle once she entered. Izumi's warning made infinitely more sense now that everyone knew that her mother was a telekinetic. A powerful one based on this display. Who did this? What was the name of the loathsome piece of human garbage who tried to ruin my baby's life? The woman growled, face livid and posture tense. A few of the nearby officers scurried off under the murderous aura the mother was emitting. Tsukachi could see Sansa cowering in a nearby cubicle, ears flat to his skull and hackles raised. Clearing his throat, the black-haired man replied, "I'm working hard to undo this, ma'am, don't worry. And her record is going to be fine, I already made sure of that." The brunette man, who Tsukachi reasoned must be Izumi's fiancé, relaxed at the news. "Thank you, detective. Going to UA means a lot to Izumi, and as much as I'd prefer she choose a career a bit safer, she has her heart set on heroism. I'd rather she didn't have her dreams crushed before she can even try, so trust me when I say this means more to us than you can possibly know." He was just as candid as Izumi was. This man, Kai if he wasn't mistaken, was in his early 20s, attractive and well-dressed. He looked familiar somehow, though the lie detector couldn't place how exactly. But the brunette seemed honest and respectable enough, engagement to a minor aside, based on what he could read from his interactions with the Midoriyas. And so long as Kai was willing to keep his hands to himself before their marriage, Tsukachi was completely fine with the two's engagement. It was legal after all. And as the trio walked out, Izumi trying and mostly failing to talk her mother down from her planned vengeance on the teen responsible for this incident, the detective smiled. He was looking forward to seeing that girl in the sports festival someday, 'cause she reminded him of another cheerful hero hopeful he knew that achieved his dream. And that's how he knew Midoriya Izumi was going to be great someday. When Kai rushed over to the station to pick her up, Izumi was immensely happy, even though he did bring her mother with him. It warmed her heart to know he cared so much for her. As they left, he told her how most of the others wanted to storm in with them when he told them where he was going, but he ordered them not to so someone could watch Eri. And that was even sweeter. She'd never had anyone but her parents care so much for her before she met the brunette and his subordinates, and the longer she knew them, the more she realized that how they treated her was supposed to be normal behavior for friends, and in Kai's case loved ones. It made her reflect on her previous friendship with Bakugo, always reaching the same conclusion: the blonde and her had never actually been friends. It hurt when she realized that. Kai and Inko had immediately taken the teen out to a cafe for lunch to decide the fate of her childhood, something in school. Izumi didn't mind her mom's plan to sue the school and teachers for their awful behavior. The greenette probably wasn't the only student being mistreated under their view, and she was too apathetic towards them after this newest backstab to care if this hurt their reputation. If they cared so much for their image, they should have tried harder to keep it and done their fucking jobs. As she sipped at her tea, contemplating her mother's many planned punishments for Bakugo, Izumi sighed. "Death and maiming are illegal and far too harsh, Mom." "Well, what do you suppose we do instead?" "We can't just do nothing, Izumi." Kai watched the two glare at each other warily before suggesting, "A restraining order is a start." Inko's green eyes turned thoughtful as she rolled the idea around in her head. That's a good idea actually." Izumi breathed in relief, shooting a look of thanks to her fiancé. She then shrugged. "Unfortunately, there isn't much else we can do where he's concerned. Even if we try to get him in trouble for this, not only was he not actually mentioned by name, giving him plausible deniability, but he's a minor and therefore probably wouldn't get more than a slap on the wrist anyways." At their responding sour looks, she added, "At least we know Auntie Mitsuki is going to punish him for this, maybe forever." Inko snorted at that. "Oh, she's going to ground that boy till he's 30 and tan his hide once she finds out. Masaru will be worse though. He may be quiet and gentle at heart, but he's a force of nature when he's angry. And he will be angry." Once they were done eating, the trio left, Inko moving back to give the couple some space when the brunette gave her a pointed look. "Izumi, I want to tell you about something." Noting his serious tone and nervous expression, the greenette worried, "Is it bad?" Depends on your definition of bad. That wasn't very reassuring. It's actually about my job. Well, me and all the others' jobs really. The teen was openly confused at first, but remembered that time she'd walked in on a meeting a week ago while chasing Eri. Is this related to those masks you were all wearing last week? In part. Kai stopped walking and faced Izumi. I've been meaning to tell you for a while, but didn't really know how to. I'm Yakuza, a Yakuza boss to be specific. The greenette blinked. Is that all? Gold eyes stared at her with open shock. I just admitted to being the leader of a gang and your response is that all? I mean, in hindsight that makes a lot of sense. The pair stared at each other a while before Kai laughed. You're okay with this? Seriously? Izumi smiled back with a shrug. It's not like you lied to me or anything. I'm honestly a little mad at myself for being so dense. It was kind of obvious. As they resumed walking, Inko smiling at them as she moved to join them again. Izumi smirked like a fox. Does this mean you have a tattoo? Kai left the Midoriyas not long after explaining to his curious fiancée that he in fact had several tattoos, which after a quick glance to the elder woman, he added that she would see once they were married, to explain what happened to the others. It was only after the mother-slash-daughter duo had been walking for a good 20 minutes alone that Izumi realized they weren't going home. Where are we going, Mom? Inko turned to her daughter as they strolled through an alley that looked pretty sketchy and smiled. I'm taking you to visit an old friend of mine from before you were born. He used to work with me and your father, but now he just works with Hisashi sometimes. She walked up to a back door with a faded sign and pulled it open, gesturing for the teen to go in first. I considered him my best and closest friend. He was possibly more excited about my pregnancy with you than your father and I were. Really? Izumi asked as they walked through the dimly lit halls towards faintly playing lounge music. Why haven't I seen him around before? His quirk makes his appearance a little intimidating to look at, so he's a little shy. Plus, he's a total workaholic. Never leaves the place. What place? This place? Came a deep baritone voice from ahead, suave and elegant, drawing the teen's attention to its speaker. Is my bar. It's nice to finally meet you in person, Izumi. The greenette nodded as she took in the man's appearance. He was dressed in a dapper suit that looked simultaneously professional and mysterious. It paired well with his dark, mist-like body and glowing yellow eyes. The teen noted the silver collar around his neck and shoulders. I take it that helps you regulate your form and keep from stretching yourself past your limits? The bartender laughed, gold eyes curving in a way that made it look like he was smiling. You're as sharp as your father. No one's ever figured that out besides the pair of you. Turning to her mother, the mist man held his arms out and near immediately they were full of the elder woman, who hugged him. It's good to see you again, Inko. I missed having you to talk to around here. I missed you too, Kurojiri. Pulling back, the woman smiled. How's babysitting? I believe you're watching my husband's student, if I'm not mistaken. Shigaraki Tamura, the man confirmed with a nod. He's usually cooped up in his room playing video games. Izumi sat on one of the stools at the counter and watched the byplay of the two adults catching up a bit before butting in. Excuse me, but what is going on exactly? Inko turned to her daughter, blushing as she realized she'd gotten off track. Sorry, sweetheart. I got carried away. Sitting next to the younger greenette, the woman continued, your boyfriend isn't the only one who wanted to tell you about their job today. So you used to work in a bar? The teen guessed, earning a chuckle from both adults. Yes and no. Inko replied, using her quirk to juggle a few nearby shot glasses playfully. While I did work a fair amount behind this counter with Kurojiri, it wasn't the job I'm referring to. I wanted to tell you about my work as Eben Pull. Izumi gasped, green eyes glittering. The vigilante? But she was the strongest telekinetic in the field of heroics in generations. Her capture record was the highest among female heroes and has yet to be surpassed by another despite her not adding to it in over 10 years. Glad to know you do your homework on more than just heroes, the elder female stated before waving a hand dismissively, and for the record that strongest telekinetic in generations spiel people started is mostly false. My quirk may not need line of sight to work, but it does. And I can only lift objects I can carry myself, since it relies on my physical strength. It was really how I used it that made me such a force to be reckoned with. My boyfriend is a gangster and my mother is secretly a badass. Any other shocking revelations for me to process today? The teen asked jokingly, only to jump when the nearby screen turned on to display a familiar silhouette half hidden in shadows. Well, so long as you're asking, I could tell you some secrets of mine. Izumi gasped as she noticed the medical equipment in frame, hooked up to the man she still remembered as a pillar of strength. Dad? Hello, princess, it's good to see you. Well, here you anyways. Izumi frowned. Did her father's side of the call screen not have video? But as he leaned forwards, she saw the reason for his response, joking in tone as it was. Her father was missing most of his face. What happened? She asked tearfully, touching the screen. Judging from the gasp her mother made, she was just as unaware of her husband's state. Work incident 5 years ago, remember? Inko sobbed and snapped at her husband. You said it wasn't bad, Hisashi. This is Dash. Considering who did this to me, I think I'm lucky this is the worst of it. The scarred man let out a heavy sigh. I'm bummed about what it means for fire breath though, can't use it when I have respiratory issues. It's a shame. That quirk was easily one of my favorites. Izumi raised a brow. You say that as if you have more than one quirk. But that's impossible. No one can have multiple quirks. Unless they had a quirk that let them take other people's quirks to use themselves or give to another. The teen caught on quick, remembering her many combs through the deep web through the years. The 200-year-old immortal? But he was a villain. Indeed I am. Though that's just the label the government slapped on myself and everyone else who wasn't one of their chosen true heroes back during the purge. Most people nowadays don't realize it, but most of the so-called villains they caught and locked up back then used to be heroes or vigilantes. And the prisons they were sent to were hardly humane. They used to experiment on the quirked inmates to figure out how their quirks worked. It was horrible. It was about halfway through the very familiar-sounding ramble that Izumi realized her father used to monologue about back in his day like this all the time when she was a kid. Hey Dad, she asked, continuing when she noticed he was listening, it's good to see you. I missed this. Just, you talking about something from way before I was born like an old man while I listen. It's nice. The faceless villain smiled, which his daughter noted hadn't changed since she saw it last, and replied, I missed you too, princess. The family's catching up was interrupted as a slouching figure shuffled into the room, tired and mildly annoyed. What the hell is going on in here? I was actually asleep normally for once? Izumi took in the older boy's appearance. His pale blue hair was long and wavy, a decent amount falling in front of his face. His red eyes were half-lidded and surrounded by deep bruising and wrinkled damaged skin that made him look like he hadn't slept properly in his life. Judging by his earlier comment, that may be an accurate assessment. He had a scar going through his right eye and the left side of his lips, which were chapped and looked like he's chewed them a lot in a nervous habit. And, as if the scarring weren't distinctive enough, the man had a single beauty mark on the right side of his chin that contrasted heavily against his deathly pale complexion. He would be cute if he took a little more care of himself, the teen mused as she noticed him scratching at his scar-covered neck in a nervous tic. Grabbing his wrist to stop the action, unaware to everyone else's immediate tensing at the act, she stated, Stop that. You've already drawn blood, any more scratching and you'll do some serious damage. The tired boy glared down at her, despite his poor posture still towering over her. Who are you? Hisashi took over, trying not to show his worry as he explained, Tamura, that is my daughter Izumi. At the pale boy's dawning look of surprise he continued, Izumi, this is my apprentice Shigaraki Tamura. I took him in when he was about 5 after he was orphaned. The brunette looked up at the elder youth, who looked far less bothered with her now. So, that kind of makes you my older brother then? Guess so. Tamura replied, carefully retracting his hand from her grip. Word of warning for the future though, grabbing me, especially near my hands, is a very bad idea. Jumpy, the teen joked, an apologetic look on her face. The blue-haired man smiled, though it looked a little spooky with the state of his face, among other things. My quirk is touch-activated and not very pleasant to experience. My standard reaction when grabbed is to use it on the one invading my personal space, so you're pretty lucky I didn't act on impulse and grab your wrist. But what would have happened? Tamura picked up a nearby ashtray from the bar counter with his pinky noticeably removed, resting it on his open palm briefly before closing his fingers around it. The second all 5 digits were in contact, the object started to crumble to dust, which piled on the counter's shiny surface in a way that made Kurojire's face pinch in distaste. Well, as much as his face could display displeasure. It's called decay. Anything I touch with all 5 fingers crumbles to dust. The brunette's eyes widened in surprise as the girl squealed with excitement and grabbed his hand again to examine it, carefully playing with the now dusty fingers curiously. That's so cool. What are the limits on it? Does it work on all kinds of matter or just a select few? Can you control the rate of decay? Does it work on complex and tricky materials like liquids or sand? The entire group blinked as the girl quite literally held a potentially dangerous threat to her health with little to no regard to her own safety for a second time, this time on purpose. Her parents weren't nearly as surprised as the others though, knowing their daughter too well. Tamura blinked in shock. You aren't afraid of it? Of me? No. Why would I be? Izumi asked naively, smiling at the decay user in a way that lit up the room. I think your quirk's amazing, Tamura and I. Everyone in the room besides Izumi clutched their hearts dramatically. That girl was so precious it was almost too cute to handle. Thank you, Izumi. That? The elder youth paused as he choked up a bit on mostly unfamiliar emotions. It means a lot to me. Not too long after meeting her older brother, the adults shooed them away so they could plot vengeance, and in Kurojire's case keep the elder youth from dirtying his counter further. So Izumi followed Tamura to his room on the pretense of sibling bonding, smiling when she noticed how nerdy in a completely different way from her own his room was. Kurojire wasn't kidding when he said you mostly stay in here playing video games, was he? This place is like a shrine to gaming. I like it. The brunette preened a bit as he set up a system and gestured to a few games for it on the nearby shelf. Pick one. But FYI, I don't have much in the way of multiplayer. That's cool. I kind of feel like watching today if that's fine with you, the girl said as she passed the male a copy of Biohazardous Remastered, earning a nod of approval. I kind of had a busy day. How so? Tamura asked as he sat back with her on the bed nearby, appreciating the pillows she placed between their backs and the wall mentally as they watched the theatrical opening to the game. For starters, it started with me being arrested for underage prostitution with older men. Red eyes looked at her with open shock, earning a laugh. Yeah, that's how I felt once I was told that. That's not all though. Jesus. He muttered quietly as he picked the female player character. Izumi smiled and continued, one of my classmates did that to try and ruin my record so I wouldn't be able to go to UA. But Detective Tsukachi found out what happened and fixed it for me. Why the hell would you want to go to a hero school? The decay user asked with an offended tone. Heroes are all hypocrites and liars. It's the best school in the country and has the best programs for heroics. I know the system's flawed and all, believe me, but I still want to help people. Being a hero, a real hero, has been my dream since I was a toddler. Izumi stared her brother in the eyes, fire burning in her green orb. I'm hardly going to give up just because a bully with a strong quirk tried to sabotage me. Tamura stared at the girl silently with growing respect before returning his gaze to the screen. He'd just reached the first zombie of the game when he spoke. I'm guessing that's what the parental units kicked us out for? Yeah. I'm not envying Bakugo's fate once Mom finishes explaining what he did to Dad. The brunette let out a bark of laughter. Sensei can be pretty brutal when he's mad. The teen smiled and continued, I also found out that, in order, my fiancé is a Yakuza boss, my mom is one of the most badass female vigilantes in history, and my dad is the mythical immortal supervillain that can steal and give quirks spoken of only on the deepest of deep web forums. And that I have you as an older brother. So, yeah. The pair sat in silence a while as the elder processed her words before he snorted. Your day was way beyond busy. As they sat in the dark, the ambient soundtrack and cheesy as fuck dialogue of the game filling the silence between them, both smiled. Neither was particularly sure how they'd get along as siblings, but so far things were looking good. The pair of nerds got along just fine, all things considered. Izumi, the girl in question, smiled and kneeled to catch the excited 5-year-old in a hug. Hello, Eri. How's things been with you and your dad while I was gone? The horned girl smiled up at her favorite teen with a toothy grin that spoke volumes of how much she was missed over the last few days. But we missed you though. I missed you too. Pulling away from the hug, Aries' red eyes locked with a similarly colored set which had watched the exchange with no small amount of amusement. The child took in his pale skin, red eyes, and pale wavy hair and blinked. Who's this? He looks like me. Izumi blinked herself and turned to compare the black-clad man she'd come with to her fiancé's little girl. As her adoptive brother slipped off his red sneakers, nearly identical to her own, she snorted as she struggled not to laugh. He kind of does. At the gamer's rolled eyes, she grabbed one of his hands, which were wearing a pair of black gloves that only covered his pinky and ring fingers while leaving the rest free, and motioned to it. He even has a contact quirk like you and Kai, though his needs all 5 fingers in contact to work. Tamura sighed but didn't remove his hand from her grip, not even when a pair of men walked up with obvious curiosity on their faces at the action. The brunette stared at their joined hands curiously, a hint of jealousy in his gold eyes that the brunette found mildly amusing, and greeted the shorter teen with a smile. Izumi, it's good to see you again. Who's your friend, if you don't mind my asking? Totally jealous, the 19-year-old thought with a smirk as he looped his arm over Izumi's shoulders to push the other's buttons further. Shigaraki Tamura, nice to meet you. I'd offer to shake hands, but my quirk makes that kind of dangerous. From their place next to the brunette, who was now openly seething, the silver-haired man stared at the decay user as though his head had fallen off. The villain grinned ferally at getting his desired reaction, only to loose that smile when Izumi rolled her eyes at him. That's what your gloves are for, Tamura and I. And stop teasing my fiancé to make him mad. Tamura pouted killjoy. The brunette motioned to the elder teen, Yakuzas, and child as she introduced the group properly. Tamura, these are my fiancé Kai, his assistant and my first friend Hari, and Kai's daughter Eri. Everyone, this is my older brother Tamura. I met him and hung out with him a lot during my parents' revenge planning the last few days. I still say we should have killed him, the brunette stated bitterly, earning a snapped Tamura. Still not changing my mind. Izumi groaned and walked further into the house, running a hand down her face after pinching the bridge of her nose. I'm not even going to bother anymore. I'm dropping this before we fight again. Following, the others blinked as she flopped face first onto the living room couch and sighed heavily, melting into the cushions. Standing next to the older girl, Eri patted her head. You okay, Izumi? Yeah, came the slightly muffled response. I've just been through a lot the last few days. Tamura sat cross-legged in front of the couch, pulling the one-horned child into his lap to make room for her father. Kai had lifted the teen up slightly to sit on the couch, resting her till she was on her back and had her head using one of his thighs as a pillow. The gamer watched the interaction with something akin to fascination as he played with his fellow destructive quirk user's long hair subconsciously. Eri, who had been surprised to be pulled into his personal space originally, relaxed at the somewhat pleasant feeling of fingers running through her white locks. Thought a lot about what I told you? Kai asked as he playfully tugged on her ponytail, earning a smile. Not really, to be honest. It was immediately followed by my parents revealing their own jobs. Green eyes locked with gold. Apparently my mom is Eben Pull. Both the Yakuza boss and his assistant, who was sitting on a nearby chair, froze at the knowledge. A chill went up the brunette's spine at the realization, the woman's words of warning replaying far more sinisterly in his mind. That explains a lot. How so? Kai cleared his throat and explained, when I told your mother my intentions to marry you and asked for her permission, she may have warned me that if I broke your heart or did anything too forward, she would rearrange my internal organs with her quirk. There was silence for a brief moment before Izumi burst out laughing. Oh my god. My mom gave you a shovel talk? It was kind of terrifying, to be honest. Knowing she's Eben Pull just makes it scarier, the Yakuza boss admitted, earning a sympathetic nod from the teen's brother. Mother can be scary when she's mad. Turning to stare at the brunette, who was well into French braiding Eri's hair, Izumi asked, why is it so easy for you to call mom mother but you continue to call dad sensei? The gamer paused, blinking tired red eyes before reaching into the pocket of his sweatshirt and pulling out a disembodied man's hand. The child in his lap blinked at it curiously while the others looked vaguely disturbed at its presence. This is father. He's why I call sensei sensei even though he took me in and raised me after father's accident. Father and sensei are different and I love them both, but I'm not replacing my father with sensei. Understand? Why is your father a hand? Eri asked curiously, head cocked to the side. Matching red eyes locked as the elder teen placed the hand back in the safety of his pocket, a melancholic expression on his scarred face, because my quirk destroys everything I touch. Both Eri and her father felt a pang of sympathy, though only the child admitted so out loud. The first time I ever used my quirk I ended up erasing my birth father. Mom was afraid of me after that and gave me away. Before Dad took me in no one really touched me and I was afraid to touch them too. I still have accidents sometimes where I'll make someone lose their quirk or disappear. Tamura blinked at the girl, resuming pleating her hair more consciously than before smiling, damn kid, that's harsh. I guess that makes us quirk buddies, huh? Eri smiled up at the gamer, repeating excitedly quirk buddies. Kai and Izumi watched the exchange fondly. While her children were relaxing at the Yakuza's house, Inko was sitting proud in a news interview. Her business suit and cold expression sharpening her rounded features and making her look as formidable as she really was beneath her chubby motherly exterior. The principal, homeroom teacher, and Bakugo sat in the sofas near her and eyed her with learned wariness. Well, the principal and teacher did. The Bakugos looked about the same they always did with her. Masaru looked apologetic, Mitsuki calm and understanding, and Katsuki was angry. The reporter, a friendly woman with a quirk that gave her features like those of a Tasmanian devil, ironically enough, named Hino Kazumi, started the interview gleefully. She had stated who they all were and why they were here very clearly, and explained why Inko had set this up. The school representatives started to sweat noticeably, realizing all too quickly how they and their school were going to suffer once this was over. And when Hino got to Katsuki's involvement and prior acts of violence and bullying against Izumi, who was stated to be with friends to recover from her traumatizing ordeal at the blonde's hands, Inko was thrilled when that little shit did exactly what she expected him to do. Who gives a shit if I got that damned quirkless nerd in trouble? It was her own damned fault for trying to get into the hero course in the first place instead of staying where she belongs. Someone had to show her where her place was. Inko closed her eyes and resisted the overwhelming urge to both smirk in victory and tie his intestines into a Gordian knot. He took the bait. Mitsuki and Masaru frowned and glared at their son, the former yelling at her fellow blonde to watch his mouth and complaining that she'd raised him better than to treat a girl like that. The boy's open bitterness at her declaration of grounding him until he's 30 was especially cathartic. The vigilante raised her hand, calling everyone's attention to her. Thank you for the interview, Hino-san, but I see this isn't going to go much better than the court cases did. So I'll make this brief. Standing to prowl like a predatory cat across the stage, she stared coldly and calmly at the Orudera staff. I won't be sending my daughter to your school anymore. My husband and I will be getting her tutors more suited to a girl of her considerable intellect. Maybe next time you'll work harder to ensure you support your best students academically rather than the ones with the flashiest quirks. I wonder how many other children under your care are neglected as my own was. Moving her gaze to the family, she smiled warmly at her friends, and thank you, Mitsuki. I know you and Masaru have been trying to rein in your son for ages. It means a lot to both Hisashi and myself how much you try to teach Katsuki to mind his manners, but it looks like he's a bit too stubborn to be helped at this point. She prowled up to the teen, pulling a thin pile of papers out for him to see as she did. And Katsuki? At the boy's prideful glare she continued, I ran every single thing I wanted to do to punish you by my daughter, to make sure she was satisfied once this was over. I could have marred your record the way you tried to mar hers for your slander and willful attempt to frame her for a crime. You could be in jail right now, without any chance to achieve your own dream of being a hero. She took satisfaction in the poorly hidden worry on his face before continuing, do you know what she said to all of them? Why should I give a shit what that quirkless waste of space dashed? He was cut off when the mother in front of him slapped him across the face with the papers in her hand. Taking a calming breath, she handed the papers to the boy's mother, who looked almost as shocked as the teen was at the greenette's actions. I would hope you care a great deal what she thinks, because she is the only reason you aren't rotting in a cell with a bunch of thugs twice your age right now for years of assault, psychological trauma, and suicide baiting. She said you deserved a chance to change, that you have potential and it would be a shame to let it go to waste. Inko snorted, personally I think you've had a few too many chances where my daughter's concerned. So I got her to settle on that. A restraining order? Mitsuki gasped as she finished reading them, looking at her friend sadly. The telekinetic nodded. A restraining order. Sorry, but until your son shows any signs of making up for what he did he's not allowed near her. The blonde woman sighed. I understand. Katsuki looked confused and upset, like he'd swallowed a fairly sour lemon. Inko bowed to the marsupial woman apologetically. I apologize for my behavior, Hino-san, but it seems my daughter isn't the only one who needs time to get over what happened. The Tasmanian devil woman waved her hand dismissively. It's fine, Mrs. Midoriya, I understand. You tried your hardest to make sure your daughter got the justice she deserved, standing tall and strong for your daughter needed you most. That's pretty admirable. And I hope Izumi is well. With a role model like you she's sure to be quite the woman someday. The greenette blushed nervously. I'm not that brave really. But Izumi? She's already quite a woman. As Inko bowed again and left the interview, leaving the further humiliation of the group in Hino Kazumi's clawed hands, she celebrated mentally. Everything was going to plan. Back at the Yakuza headquarters, Izumi continued explaining her crazy realizations to her fiancé. I also saw my dad for the first time since his work accident 5 years ago. He's missing most of his face and is hooked up to some sort of life support machine. It's a respirator. Tamura explained. Of all the injuries he got in that fight his lungs got it worst. He's also usually in a wheelchair, not because he can't walk but because he gets tired and sore more easily than before. Kai digested that information for a few minutes with a hum of understanding before getting an idea. You know, I could probably heal him with my quirk, so long as he doesn't mind the side effects. Both teens stared at him in obvious surprise, though Izumi's was more understanding. You'd do that? If he was willing to let me? Green eyes sparkled as she hugged him, jumping up from the couch and grabbing her phone. I'm calling him to ask. Hey Dad. The others stared at her as her expressions shifted with the man's words, which they couldn't hear, but could guess based on her reactions. I'm good. I wanted to ask you something though. Well, I want to ask you something for Kai. With a fond eye roll she spoke again. No, nothing like that. Tamura and I mentioned your injuries. Yes, I know, but just hear me out. Kai mentioned that he might be able to heal you with overhaul. You know as well as I do how well it would work healing you, squeamishness and pain aside, so I'm asking you, for him, if you'd be interested. There was a pause, then a smile broke out on the teen's face. She squealed with joy and skipped back over to the couch. Awesome. See you soon. Putting her phone away, she latched herself to her fiancé's arm, pulling him to his feet. Come on, let's go. Now, the brunette asked, slightly amused, earning a nod. The girl's brother had already stood up, carrying Eri in his arms with an equally excited smile. Mother's going to be ecstatic when she gets back. Chrono shrugged and joined the others in putting his sneakers on. But how are we going to get there? As he finished speaking, a dark portal made up of swirling black mist formed in the hallway behind him. Never mind then. Kai wasn't sure what he expected when he passed through the warp gate, but this was something else. True to their words, Mr. Midoriya was in a wheelchair with several tubes and machines attached to him, several of which were obviously to help with breathing and relieve pain, and was missing all of his facial features from his mouth upwards. Despite his obvious injuries, he lounged in the chair, resting his cheek on his closed fist and one leg crossed over the other like a bored king. The way he seemed to radiate power and confidence in his state certainly left the Yakuza boss feeling like he was in the presence of one. So, this is the Yakuza who's courting my princess, the older man drawled menacingly with a feral smile. Dad. Izumi snapped, face scarlet, no princess in public. It's embarrassing. It's true though, the faceless man teased before turning serious. You're the daughter of Eben Pole and all for one sweetheart. That makes you as close to an actual princess as one can get. The pair of Yakuza froze at his words, recognizing that name all too well. There wasn't a person in the darker side of this world, be they villains, Yakuza, street thugs, or vigilantes, who hadn't heard of the mythical kingpin of the dark all for one. Most just regarded him as a boogeyman, but Kai's father, the previous boss, had taught him otherwise. The brunette grew up knowing the immortal king of villains was real. And now he realized that not only was he about to heal the man, but he was currently engaged to his daughter. "It's an honor to meet you, sir," Kai stated, hoping he didn't sound as terrified as he felt. "Your daughter speaks very highly of you." As he bowed, he glanced at Chrono next to him, hardly surprised to see that his assistant was too petrified to move. The injured supervillain smiled, "I'm sure." "So, you've offered to heal me?" "Yes, sir." The ancient villain nodded and wheeled away from his desk. "Let's change rooms then. I don't know about you, but I'm not fond of dirtying my office with something as prone to staining as blood." Tamura snorted, speaking for the first time since they arrived. "You just don't want to have to clean your shrine to Izumi and I." In the teen's arms, Eri mirrored Izumi's raised brow and questioned, "Shrine?" The brunette walked over to the man's desk, motioning for his sister to follow. Hilariously, everyone but all for one did. The result upon seeing what was in the many frames covering the large surface was equally so. There were dozens of photos of both teens, at nearly all ages of their lives so far. School photos of Izumi's, candid shots of both as small children, a few baby pictures of Izumi's, and a pair of group shots, one with the entire Midoriya family, the other with just Tamura and his sensei smiling. On the top corner of the man's computer was even a small black and white ultrasound photo that had "Princess" scrawled at the bottom. Izumi blushed, clutching her chest with one hand and hiding her face with the other. "I honestly don't know whether this is sweet or mortifying." The 5-year-old chimed in, "I like it," craning her neck to look at the older teen's scarred face. "You were cute when you were my age." Tamura groaned as his sensei laughed. He really was, knowing he was about to start an embarrassing story about his childhood. "Right? Let's get back to healing. We can reminisce later." Kai smirked at the brunette's obvious subject change, but complied. He could always hear whatever stories the younger contact quirked male was trying not to have shared later. Judging by his flush, they were going to be entertaining. Inko was surprised to find several pairs of shoes by the door when she got back, two a familiar red. Apparently her children had decided to bring the Yakuza they'd visited home with them. Entering further, she found Kai and Tamura on the couch, enough room for a third person between them and the former's daughter in the latter's lap. The decay-quirked teen was apparently teaching the 5-year-old the wonders of video games via Super Jump Brothers. Kurono was in the kitchen with Izumi, insistent on helping her cook dinner while the teen reluctantly obliges him with a fond eye roll. Upon spotting her in the hallway, her daughter's eyes sparkled. "Hey Mom, how was the interview?" "Good," the green-haired woman replied with a smile as she moved to join the pair in the kitchen. "What's all this for?" "It isn't for me, is it? Because I told you not to spoil me for this, Izumi." The teen's smile widened mischievously. "Oh, it isn't just to thank you. Today's a special occasion." The telekinetic's brow rose quizzically. "How so?" "Hello, Inko." The woman tensed, green eyes turning to the speaker to stare with open shock. Sitting at the dining room table, watching her and the others with a lazy smile, was her husband. Hisashi was exactly how he'd looked the day she'd met him, curly black hair wild, pairing with the dusting of freckles across his nose and cheeks to give him a boyish look. No scars, both of his eyes as dark as she remembered. As the raven let out a small puff of smoke like he used to tease her, she felt her eyes water. He had his face back. He was healthy again. "Hi, Hisashi," Inko cried, running to wrap her arms around him and burying her face in the junction between his neck and shoulder in a way she hadn't for a long time. The Yakuza watched, mildly fascinated, as the oldest and most fearsome villain to ever live comforted the weeping most fearsome female vigilante of all time. If someone had told them they'd one day witness this, they would have declared that person completely insane, but here they were. Before long, Izumi started to tear up herself, joining her parents in a family hug which her elder brother looked all too happy to stay out of. Tamura shook his head as he watched his future niece kicking ass at the game on screen. This family is so weird. The next morning, Izumi woke to find herself sharing her bed with two other people, a bit too groggy still to remember why or how. Her face was buried in long white hair, the owner of which was cuddled into her front with their face buried in the teen's cleavage. As she regained her awareness, the greenette recognized the culprit as Eri. One mystery person down the teen turned her attention to the other, who was using both Eri and herself as a teddy bear. Judging by the way their long limbs wrapped all the way around both Eri and herself easily, as well as the flash of blue she caught in the corner of her eye when she tried to get a glimpse of their face, this one was Tamura. As the memories of how she came to be sleeping in a cuddle pile with the pair returned with her wakeness, Izumi smiled. Last night, when Kai and Hari were preparing to go home, Izumi offered that the 5-year-old stay the night. The brunette was confused at first when she'd said it would save them from having to drop the child off in the morning, planning to give his fiancée another day off to spend with her family. But Izumi was determined to keep her promise of watching Eri this weekend. She refused to make Kai take another day off for her sake. Eri was perfectly happy with the impromptu sleepover to absolutely no one's surprise. And as for how Tamura came to join the girls in the cuddle pile, did anyone really expect Izumi to let her big brother, a man known for sleeping issues, spend the night on a couch by himself? A flash of light caught the greenette's attention, drawing her equally green gaze to its source in her doorway. There stood her father, wearing only a pair of baggy sweatpants, with a camera in his hands and a cheeky smirk on his face. Izumi rolled her eyes in fond exasperation. It appears that some things never change where her father's concerned. "Morning, Dad." "Good morning, Princess," the raven replied a bit too cheerfully for Tamura's liking, judging by groan he made into his sister's shoulder. "Sleep well?" "Fuck off. Too early for this goddamn bullshit?" The elder teen grumbled, burying his face further into the back of Izumi's neck. The greenette struggled not to laugh at her brother's morning grumpiness, which she'd grown somewhat used to over the last few days since meeting him. Hisashi, however, made no attempts to hide his laughter at the response. After everyone had woken up and eaten breakfast, which was peppered with the brunette's bitter comments about being the only non-morning person of the lot, the family left for the mall. Eri's odd reaction to the Kiyoshi Ward shopping mall and the many stores within was adorable. And her matter-of-fact comment of, "Dad is going to bathe me in antiseptic when I get home," afterward drew a surprised bark of laughter from Izumi. The family spent a good handful of hours just wandering and going into any and every store that looked even remotely interesting to them. Several clothing stores were raided for new outfits for everyone. Even Eri left with a few new dresses courtesy of Izumi's mostly untouched salary from babysitting her. A bookstore was browsed for several shelves worth of reading for Izumi, Hisashi, and Eri. Izumi's being about history, heroes, villains, and vigilantes. Her father's were teaching aids on several subjects for his daughter's schooling, as well as a handful of his favorite novels through the centuries he'd lived. And Eri's were all about the ocean, fish, and animals in general. The greenette giggled when she imagined the look on Kai's face at her myriad of new animal care books. While the trio raided the bookstore, Inko had followed her adoptive son into the game shop next door. The telekinetic watched as he animatedly explained the various genres and subgenres of the medium and rambled about each major company's main series. Tamura and Inko rejoined the others with a few purchases each of their own, the former eager to expand his Quirk buddy's gaming resume with some titles more suited to her age range and mildly impressed at his mother's newfound interest in his hobby. Izumi took one look at her mother's purchases from the store and raised eyebrows. "Survival horror, shooters, and dark soulful. You're starting with those?" "Of course. You know I love a challenge, sweetheart." Glancing at her phone curiously, Izumi hummed. "Well, it's nearly 2 now. Let's drop these off in the car and go get some lunch at the food court." At the mention of food, everyone else immediately registered that they were hungry, Eri's stomach even giving a warble. So they moved to do just that. As they put the many bags in the trunk, most of which Hisashi had carried literally single-handedly, Tamura noticed his sister pull out a picnic basket to bring with them. "I thought you said we were eating at the food court?" "We are. I just thought it would be nicer if it was like a picnic." At Eri's confused, "What's a picnic?" all 4 Midoriyas stared at her with open shock. The brunette gasped and picked up the 5-year-old. "We're fixing this. We're having a picnic right now, let's go." As he power-walked, his parents smiled amusedly at his antics. "I can't believe your dad's never taken you on a picnic. Next you'll say you've never gone camping," he grumbled jokingly, only to gape like a fish when the white-haired girl comments, "I don't know what camping is either," before making an affronted noise. Having reached the food court, Tamura turned to Izumi, "Find a good spot to set up, I'll get some KFC. Any requests?" The other teen shook her head. "Picnic, remember? Everyone go get something to share." The adults nodded in understanding, Hisashi going to get sushi while Inko grabbed sandwiches. True to his word, the gamer and Eri were already well into ordering some chicken for the group by the time Izumi finished laying down the blanket and dishes. As she sat there, ignoring the many odd looks she garnered for setting up a picnic indoors, she entertained herself by people watching. There were several groups of teenage girls giggling and surrounded by bags full to the brim with clothes. There was a few families scattered around, those with small children being a bit more tired-looking. And many of the mutant quirked people she glimpsed were noted in her mind to be written down later. That was when Izumi noticed her. In the far corner, sitting by herself and eating nothing as she watched others do so with overt envy, was a girl with blonde hair pulled into messy buns. She was thin, tired-looking, and both her and her outfit, a school uniform for a middle school she vaguely recognized, were dirty and in poor condition. Any time a group of girls their age would notice the blonde, they would tense and immediately scurry away, eyeing her like some kind of rabid animal and whispering amongst themselves in a way that made the lonely girl curl in on herself sadly. Izumi knew that feeling all too well. Jumping when her mother placed a hand on her shoulder, Izumi steeled her resolve. "Hey Mom, give me a second? I need to go do something." Barely registering the older greenette's nod, the teen stood, walking intently to the table the blonde was at. "Hey!" Gold, cat-like eyes stared at her with confusion as she continued, "I'm Midoriya Izumi." "Toga Himiko?" The other teen replied, curiously accepting the greenette's offered hand to shake and being openly surprised when she's pulled to her feet by it. "What, where are you taking me?" Himiko asked as Izumi led her to the blanket, her entire family now occupied with knowing looks on their faces. "I thought you looked lonely sitting by yourself, so I thought, that you could join us here? There's more than enough food to share with you too, so—" The other girl sat next to her, teary-eyed and blushing. "Why, you looked like you needed a friend," the greenette replied, squeezing the hand she was still holding, "so I thought I'd offer. I don't really have any friends my age to be honest, and you look nice." Toga laughed, the sound tinged with sadness, disbelief, and bitterness. "You want to be friends with me? I've heard that before." Glaring at her lap before turning her stubborn expression to Izumi, the blonde continued angrily, "I have a blood quirk, you know. I ingest someone's blood and I can turn into them, just without their quirk. Do you still want to be friends now?" "Yes." At the freckled teen's response, the fanged girl freezes, tearing up further as the girl continues, "Your quirk sounds pretty awesome. Have you thought of interning with Vlad King? You'd make a great underground hero with a quirk like that." Izumi resolutely ignored her father and brother's pinched looks at that comment. "Ooh, we could take the entrance exam together." Himiko cried as she wrapped the curly-haired teen in a hug. "Yeah, that sounds fun." Hugging back, the greenette smiled before offering the other girl a plate and gesturing to the food. "After this we were going to check out the spa here. Want to join Toga-chan?" The blonde beamed, showing off a vampiric smile. "Sure." Toga Himiko hadn't been this happy in a very long time. The second her quirk was discovered, what had once been the most doting parents in the world viewed her as some sort of monster. The blonde had often found herself locked away or punished for little to no reason besides having such an unsightly quirk. Her friends had all abandoned her, no one else daring to try befriending the teen from this point onward for fear of her using her creepy blood quirk on them. And just last year Himiko had been kicked out of her house, disowned and left to fend for herself on the streets. But here was a girl her age from a different school, a different city, that didn't care about any of that. Izumi liked her blood quirk, pointing out the very uses Himiko had found but no one else seemed to bother seeing. She was the perfect spy, great for sneaking into enemy hideouts or escaping them if captured. The blonde had dreamed of being a hero like that, Like the femme fatale spies in old movies she would watch in her many years of isolation who the handsome hero always falls for. She would even have settled for being a police detective if she couldn't make a hero school. Which, to be honest, she couldn't really afford as a homeless kid. As she relaxed with the greenette teen and her family, the vampiric girl felt warmth and hope again for those dreams which died a little more with every day on her own. Izumi believed in her. She wanted to try together, to be a team. Izumi-chan? Himiko asked, wrapping the other girl in a hug after a much overdue shower that was offered with the spa treatments here, when the greenette hummed in response. Thank you. For being her friend. For saying everything she'd so desperately needed to hear from someone, anyone, her entire life. For being so nice that she would treat her, a stranger with a creepy quirk, to the best day of her life just because she could. Just for existing even. Himiko couldn't even list all the things she wanted to thank her new friend for. But as the quirkless girl, and wasn't that a surprise that answered more than a few of the blonde's questions as to how a girl as nice as Izumi had no friends her age in the saddest way possible, hugged her back and led her to the room where they, the greenette's equally green-haired mother, the adorable 5-year-old Eri, whom Himiko had yet to work out the family relation of, but was betting on baby sister, and the teen's sort of cute older brother who was begrudgingly going along with the spa trip were going to enjoy a relaxing mud bath. Meanwhile, the other girl's father left to enjoy a massage to, as he joked, relieve a few centuries of tension from his muscles. Toga had no idea why the family had laughed so hard at such a bad joke, and clearly neither did the youngest among them, but Izumi's laugh was cute enough that the blonde wasn't too bothered by it. About halfway through their intended hour of soaking, when everyone was boneless from how relaxed they were, the pleasant conversations were broken by a simple question from the only male currently among them. I know this is probably super rude, but where do you live, Toga? Himiko blinked and looked at the blonde, whose wavy hair was up in a messy bun not unlike her own pair to keep it out of the mud and looked very cute, focused Toga. Seeing no point in lying and refusing to feel sorry for herself, she was blunt. I was kicked out about a year ago. Been sleeping mostly in alleys or abandoned buildings if I can find one close enough to my school. The older teen's red eyes locked with her cat-like ones as he answered, you can probably room in the bar with Kurojiri and I if you want. We have a few rooms to spare and he can make sure you're at school on time with his warp quirk. Or you could just get homeschooled with Izumi, since she'll probably help you study anyways. Your choice. Gold eyes blinked owlishly as Himiko registered his words. Are you offering me a place to stay? And to cover my schooling? Tamura's response was a blank yeah. So, are you interested? Just, thank you. Himiko squealed happily, I could kiss you right now. Please don't. I'm not into girls. At that comment both greenettes stared at him, really? Eri's response, and the first word she'd spoken since entering the baths, was, do you mean that like Rappa, in that you like boys? Or like Tingai in that you don't like anyone like that? Himiko was impressed with the young girl's insight with that question, though the blonde herself had no idea who those people were. The first one, I think. After a few nods and noises of acceptance, there was a brief moment of silence. It was immediately broken when Izumi suggested, that means you can join Toga and I on girls' nights and sleepovers then? The older teen sighed heavily as his sister planned a sleepover at the bar, which Toga recognized as being the place the elder lived and offered her a room in, and listed all the things they would do. Toga added a few suggestions herself, things she's always heard her classmates talk about but never done. Judging by what she knew of the greenette, the same was likely true for Izumi. And while he didn't respond to any of the girl's suggestions, Tamura didn't refuse the offer. Himiko smiled when his only response was a begrudging fine. That sounded a bit too fond for him to be actually bothered by the idea. She liked this. Himiko hoped the Midoriyas were always like this, because she could get used to it. The blonde already kind of loved it. Himiko took to life in the bar, and Kurojiri, extraordinarily well. Her new room was filled with cute things in pink and red, so much red. It was everything she'd always wanted and the first place she'd genuinely called home in years. The brief glance into her roomie's gamer cave next door made her smile fondly. It was just as Tamura as her own room was hers and she loved it. The blonde was currently sitting at the bar counter, kicking her feet playfully as she drank a soda that the misty bartender gave her to try and ease her boredom. The cranberry ginger ale wasn't the sweetest or most delicious thing she'd ever drunk, but it was a beautiful shade of red and healthy enough that she could ask for more of them than any other drink her new caretaker could make for her. She was eagerly waiting for her bestie to appear. How strange it was to actually be excited for school. She wondered what her sort of friend and fellow street kid Dobby would say about this when he finds out. Speaking of Dobby, she should find him and tell him about this place. He'd gladly help Kurogiri wipe down tables if it meant no more sleeping in alleys. Himiko was broken from her thoughts by the arrival of her two favorite greenettes. Izumi. The teens hugged, Inko doing the same with Kurogiri not so far away. The mist man formed a portal once everyone had pulled away, gesturing for the girls to go. Toga glanced curiously when the adults stayed behind, her friend explaining, "Mom told me she was going to start going back to her old jobs, so she and Kurogiri are going to tend the bar while we're here." The blonde's eyes sparkled at the knowledge. "You mean Dash?" "Yeah. Eben Pohl's going to be coming out of retirement?" The pair squeed, earning a pointed throat clearing from across the room. Turning their gaze to the source, the girls flushed in embarrassment. Hisashi smirked playfully as he gestured to a large empty table in front of him with two chairs. "As much as I agree with your sentiments about my Inko's return to vigilantism, we do have work to do, girls." "Sorry, sensei," the pair muttered as they sat down. Both teens were very excited to know what they would be learning, eyeing the two stacks of books and worksheets with curiosity. The Raven smiled and pressed a button on a remote he had in his hand. "Yes, you'll be given those later. They're for you to do at your own pace, and preferably together. So long as the contents are memorized and understood, I could care less if it was done the traditional way. Society may claim to be more advanced, but I guarantee the schoolwork and tests you take are nearly identical to the ones I took over 200 years ago. And those were ancient when I was a student." Izumi nodded, hardly surprising either when she explained, "I looked it up when I entered Urudara. Teaching practices have remained largely unchanged for over 500 years, only adding minor changes to specific information that's been added over the years in topics like science and history." "Very true." But back on track, behind him appeared a screen, which showed a photo of himself and another man who bore a striking resemblance to Tamura laughing together in formal wear colored to match their hair, black for Hisashi and white for the other. "I'm going to start by teaching you about the history I'm most familiar with, since I can tell you many personal accounts beyond the propaganda and watering down to make it palatable for children. This photo is from the start of my career in heroism. Yuko and I took this after our first successful capture as a team." Noting his daughters gazing at the photo and confused, the villain added, "Yuko was my younger brother. And he was underestimated by many as my partner because his quirk was what is known today as an invisible quirk, so all of us believed he was quirkless." Just as he thought, her green eyes sparkled with delight at the information. "You mean he was a hero despite Dash not having a quirk?" he finished for her, nodding. "He was incredibly strong, my brother. You actually remind me of him a lot." Clearing his throat, the man got back on track. "Later in our career, the government started implementing the start of the hero legislation that formed our current society, scouting the more than 280 unofficial heroes and vigilantes in Japan from a distance the way America did when they created the system the year earlier. The riots between those for and against quirked individuals were at their peak, and everyone was desperate for some sort of answer to the problem. So it was approved with little care for the ethics of it or its many flaws that went against the law contained within." Several photos of riots and hate propaganda from both sides covered the screen behind him to accentuate his point. "Toga." The girl in question sat up straighter upon being addressed. "Yes? Can you guess how many of the 280 unlicensed heroes and vigilantes were made government-approved heroes? Or what the response to those not chosen was?" The blonde looked confused, having no idea, but she guessed anyways with what she considered the logical answer. "I'm not sure. Maybe half of them, at least a quarter for sure. There would be too much work for the heroes chosen otherwise. And those not chosen? A fine maybe if they got caught practicing vigilantism, like they do nowadays. That would have been the logical thing to do." Hisashi agrees before correcting sourly, but it wasn't what they did. Of over 280 hero candidates, only 12 were chosen. At the girl's looks of shock and disgust he chuckled, "Oh, that isn't the worst part." The government's response towards the rest of the heroes and vigilantes was to blanket mark them as villains and put bounties on their heads for our arrest. Rather than have the 12 licensed heroes solve actual crimes or aid disaster victims as some of them do now, what they should all be doing, they made them track down and capture or kill those not lucky enough to be chosen. Noting their ill expressions but eager to get through the worst part of this lesson, he pushed forward. My brother, due to a quirk I had gifted him after a particularly bad scare against a group of quirked thugs, was one of the chosen 12. He was effectively their leader after a year and spent most of his life capturing me and our previous friends and colleagues because he believed that the laws were for the best interest of everyone. Yuko was naive and believed far too much in the very people who had done nothing but terrible things to those with quirks, but I let him get away with far more than I probably should have in the name of our shared blood and past as a hero duo. Pausing to collect himself, he showed a series of photos from the inside of the old quirk prisons he was intimately familiar with. What he didn't realize, and what permanently solidified my belief that our current system is rotten to its very core, was what I witnessed and experienced inside the prisons those caught were sent to. When he was done the lesson, both girls carrying their respective piles of work with numb and horrified expressions through the warp gate back to the bar after hugging him tightly, Hisashi switched the slide back to the first one. Staring at his brother's wide smile, juxtaposed with the many flashes of their awful last fight in his mind, the centuries-old villain cried in solitude for far from the first time. Tamura, having waited for the girls at the bar counter, took in their shell-shocked expressions with minor worry. So, what was Sensei's first lesson? Izumi placed her stack of work on the counter and wrapped the older boy in a tight hug. Promise we won't ever fight? Even when I become a hero and you stay a villain? The brunette was more than a little shocked at the request, especially when Toga mirrored his currently weeping sister in clinging to him like a morose koala on his back rather than the front the brunette occupied. Standing in the middle of a sobbing girl sandwich, he replied, "I wasn't planning on it. But sure, I promise not to fight you too." After warily patting his sister's head, careful to mind his finger placement since he wasn't wearing his gloves, until she'd relaxed a bit, he repeated his original question. This time the blonde responded, "Midoriya-sensei told us about the start of the hero licensing and the prisons quirked people were sent to at the dawn of quirks. He told us about his brother and a bunch of other people from back then on both sides, not just as their hero, vigilante, or villain careers like they would in school. He told us what they were like as people, what they believed and stood for." Tamura sighed, remembering the old villain's retelling of the horrors that went on in that prison well from his own days as a younger student of the man. "That's certainly a way to start one's school year," he commented blankly. I think he wanted to get the worst part out of the way so the rest would be less heavy by comparison. "Sensei's big on the whole ripping off the band-aid first thing. I bet your lesson tomorrow will be much more fun." By now both girls had calmed down, so the brunette carefully prompted them to detach from his person. "How about you two go put your work away while I set up a movie in my room? We can watch whatever, eat some snacks, and start that sleepover you two planned early." At his suggestion the pair perked up, the blonde suggesting, "Can you make it a musical? I'm in the mood for some singing." Giving a thumbs up as he walked to show he heard her, he disappeared around the corner, leaving the pair with the bartenders that had witnessed the entire exchange. Inko smiled sadly at her friend. "Do you think you can watch them alone? I want to check on my husband." The teleporter gladly provided the woman with a portal with a nod. "I'll be fine, you go ahead." Left alone, the girls having disappeared in Toga's room briefly before moving to Tamura's, Kurogiri wiped the counter and poured himself a glass of whiskey. Today was a busy day. Sleepovers, Tamura found, were actually not that bad. He sat between both girls, a mostly empty bowl of popcorn in each of their laps and a pile of empty chocolate wrappers and soda cans on his bedside table on his bed. They had watched through a marathon of musicals, starting with Annie, then Little Shop of Horrors, then Rocky Horror Picture Show, and were ending on Repo, the genetic opera. All three had randomly started singing whatever song they knew or enjoyed, so there was a lot of singing from all three, and the prior's sad mood was nowhere to be seen. Which was his intent when he chose these movies specifically. After the movies were done, there was a brief moment where they just laid together and talked. Izumi talked about her fiancé, giving guesses as to where and what his tattoos were that even her brother reluctantly got into. He may tease his sister's future husband for his own amusement, and not be particularly fond of the brunette personally, but he does have eyes. Enkai is a handsome son of a bitch. That train of thought got the trio talking about what they found attractive about boys in general. Himiko had brought up a fellow street kid that she expressed interest on introducing them to, Dabi. According to her, he was still hot even though he's covered in burns and piercings, but Tamura didn't completely trust a girl whose main method of deciding who was hot was how good they would look covered in red, preferably from the blood of themselves or their enemies. When Kurojiri came to check on them later, peeking through the door silently, he smiled. The teens were tangled together, hair done up in different styles than normal and green-tinted mud on their faces, as they chattered like, well, teenagers and painted their nails. Witnessing a young man as proud and antisocial as Tamura doing such an activity was as amusing as it was heartwarming for the bartender. It was good to see him actively relaxing in a way that didn't involve video games for once. Carefully shutting the door, he left the group to their fun.